In this video, we're going to be breaking down 2 hours of Rick and Morty lore. Let's get started with the video. First up we got the Central Finite Curve, the prison that contains everything. The Central Finite Curve is the biggest secret in Rick and Morty, a cosmic wall that separates all the universes where Rick is the smartest person alive from the rest of infinite reality. For years, fans thought Rick could travel anywhere in the multiverse, but the truth is, he's been trapped in a prison of his own making, and every adventure we've ever watched has taken place inside this carefully constructed bubble. When Rick uses his portal gun to hop between dimensions, it seems like he can go anywhere in existence. He's told Morty countless times that there are infinite universes with infinite possibilities. But there's a catch that nobody knew about until evil Morty revealed the truth in the Season 5 finale. Rick hasn't been traveling through the true multiverse at all. Instead, he's been confined to a specific section of reality where he's guaranteed to always be the most intelligent being around. The concept was first mentioned way back in Season 1, Episode 10, when a member of the Council of Ricks told Rick C-137, "Of all the Ricks in the Central Finite Curve, you're the malcontent." At the time, it seemed like just another throwaway sci-fi term. But this single line planted the seeds for one of the show's most important revelations, one that would completely change how we understand every episode that came before it. The signs were always there if you knew where to look. In the Ricklantis mix-up, we learned that Simple Rick's origin was 60 iterations off the Central Finite Curve. This suggested that some Ricks existed closer to, or further from this mysterious boundary. Simple Rick was different from other Ricks. He was content with his family life and found joy in simple moments with his daughter Beth. His tears of happiness were so pure that the Citadel used them to make treats that gave people artificial satisfaction. For years, fans theorized about what the Central Finite Curve could mean. Some thought it was just a way to categorize different types of universes. Others believed it was connected to Rick's intelligence level. But the truth was far more sinister and far-reaching than anyone imagined. Rick had always claimed to be the Rickest Rick, the most Rick-like version of himself across all realities. He constantly put down other Ricks, calling them less capable or too willing to cooperate with authority. But this superiority complex hid a dark secret about how reality itself had been manipulated to ensure his dominance. The truth about the Central Finite Curve exploded into the open during evil Morty's final plan in Rick Murai Jack. After capturing Rick C-137 and scanning his brain, evil Morty revealed the scope of Rick's deception to both Morty and the audience. The Central Finite Curve isn't just a classification system, it's a massive machine built underneath the Citadel of Ricks that walls off entire sections of the multiverse. Using advanced portal gun technology, Rick C-137 and the early Council of Ricks created a barrier that prevents travel to any universe where Rick isn't the dominant life form or the smartest being alive. This means universes where Jerry is the smartest person or where Rick Sanchez doesn't even exist are completely cut off from the curve. The machine literally locks out travel to or from these realities. Evil Morty described it perfectly. Every version of us has spent every version of all of our lives in one infinite crib built around an infinite baby. The baby is Rick, and the crib is the Central Finite Curve. By isolating only the universes where Rick reigns supreme, the Ricks created a false reality where they could maintain the illusion of being the ultimate beings in existence. The system goes even deeper than just preventing travel. The Citadel has been secretly manipulating events across the curve to ensure a steady supply of Mortys. They influence how Beth's and Jerry's meet in different timelines, essentially breeding Mortys to serve as Rick's companions and brainwave camouflage. This isn't random chance, it's a carefully orchestrated system of control. The Central Finite Curve exists in a pocket dimension, accessible from any reality within the curve if you know the right coordinates. But without the machine running beneath the Citadel, travel beyond the curve is impossible. The portal guns that every Rick uses are programmed to only access universes within this restricted zone. This revelation recontextualizes every adventure Rick and Morty have ever been on. When Rick talked about infinite universes and infinite possibilities, he was technically telling the truth, but it was a very limited version of infinity. There are infinite universes where Rick is the smartest person, but there are also infinite universes where he's not, and those have been completely hidden from view. When evil Morty revealed this information, it devastated both Morty and the audience. Everything we thought we knew about the show's premise was wrong. Rick wasn't the smartest man in the universe. Anyone, He was just the smartest man in a carefully curated selection of universes, designed to make him feel superior. Evil Morty used this knowledge to power his escape plan. He overcharged the Citadel's dimensional drive and turned the entire space station into a massive portal gun fueled by the corpses of Ricks and Mortys. This created enough energy to punch a hole through the central finite curve, allowing him to escape into the wider multiverse, where Rick's dominance wasn't guaranteed. The destruction of the Citadel and Evil Morty's escape created a massive rift in the curve. For the first time in decades, there was a gateway between the Rick-controlled section of reality and the rest of existence. Evil Morty stepped through this breach using a yellow portal gun, different from Rick's green portals, symbolizing his access to previously unreachable dimensions. Rick was left stranded in the ruins of the Citadel, with Morty, finally forced to confront the consequences of his actions. The empire he helped build was destroyed, and the secret that had defined his entire existence was exposed. For once, Rick had no clever escape plan or scientific solution to fix what had been broken. The breaking of the central finite curve has fundamentally changed the rules of Rick and Morty's universe. In later episodes, we learned that the rift was eventually repaired by dinosaurs, much to Rick's annoyance, since he had hoped to use it as an ongoing plot device. But the damage to Rick's psyche and reputation couldn't be fixed so easily. The revelation forced Morty to see his grandfather in a new light. Rick wasn't the cosmic genius he claimed to be. He was someone so insecure about his intelligence that he literally walled himself off from any reality where he might not be the smartest. This prison wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Rick needed to believe he was superior to everyone else, even if it meant living in a lie. The central finite curve also explains some of the show's earlier mysteries. Doofus Rick, who seemed less intelligent than other Ricks, might have been from closer to the edge of the curve, where Rick's intelligence started to diminish. Simple Rick's contentment and emotional stability could have come from being 60 iterations off the main curve, suggesting that Ricks become more narcissistic and emotionally damaged the deeper they are within the controlled zone. Evil Morty's escape raises questions about what lies beyond the curve. Are there universes where Jerry is a genius? Where Beth never had children? Where Rick never invented portal travel? The show has only given us glimpses of these possibilities, but they represent a vast, unexplored multiverse that could dwarf everything we've seen so far. The central finite curve revelation also reframes Rick's relationship with his family. His need to keep Morty as a companion isn't just about having a brainwave camouflage device. It's about maintaining the system that keeps him feeling superior. Without Morty's to manipulate and control, the entire structure of Rick's reality would collapse. In Unmortrican, Rick basically fracked the central finite curve to flush out Rick Prime, causing shockwaves that reached Evil Morty's refuge beyond the curve. This brought Evil Morty back into the story temporarily, but it also showed that the curve's destruction had ongoing consequences that couldn't be easily contained. The central finite curve represents the show's deepest exploration of Rick's character flaws. It's not enough for him to be smart, he needs to be the smartest, even if it means creating an elaborate prison to guarantee his superiority. This need for control extends to his family relationships, his adventures with Morty, and even his understanding of reality itself. The concept also serves as a metaphor for toxic masculinity and the lengths some people will go to maintain their sense of superiority. Rick literally rewrote the rules of existence to avoid ever feeling inferior or challenged. But as Evil Morty proved, even the most elaborate control systems can't prevent people from eventually seeing through the illusion and demanding their freedom. The central finite curve isn't just a plot device, it's the key to understanding everything about Rick and Morty. Every joke, every adventure, and every family moment has taken place within this cosmic prison. And now that the secret is out, both the characters and the audience have to grapple with what it means to live in a reality that's been manipulated from the very beginning. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have Rick C. 137's origin story, from family man to interdimensional terrorist. Rick Sanchez wasn't always the cynical, alcoholic mad scientist we know today. He started as a humble family man who was struggling to invent teleportation technology while living a normal middle-class life with his wife Diane and young daughter Beth in Dimension C-137. Everything changed when another Rick Prime, appeared in his garage and destroyed his family out of spite, transforming a loving father into one of the multiverse's most dangerous beings. For the first 3 seasons of Rick and Morty, Rick's past remained largely mysterious. We knew he had abandoned his family for 20 years before returning to live with Beth, but the reason for his absence was unclear. Rick himself seemed to deflect any questions about his history with jokes, burps, or sudden changes of subject. The first major hint about Rick's origins came in the Rickshank Rickdemption, when the Galactic Federation used a brain-scanning device to extract Rick's memories. The device showed what appeared to be Rick's origin story, a tale of a young scientist whose family was murdered by another Rick, driving him to invent portal technology for revenge. But Rick immediately dismissed this as a totally fabricated origin story, leaving fans to wonder what was real and what was fake. The truth remained hidden until Season 5's Rick Mirror Jack, when evil Morty scanned Rick's brain and revealed the real memories to both Morty and the audience. Most of what Rick had shown the Federation was actually true. He had just used the memory scan as a way to upload a virus and escape. The fabricated story was largely accurate, with only minor details changed to serve Rick's escape plan. Rick C-137's real backstory begins in his home dimension, where he lived as a normal scientist with normal problems. Unlike the genius-level Rick we know, young Rick was actually struggling with his inventions. He was working on basic teleportation technology and having trouble making it work properly. This was before portal guns existed, before interdimensional travel was possible, and before Rick had any reason to think of himself as the smartest person in any universe. Rick's life in Dimension C-137 was remarkably ordinary by the show's standards. He had a stable marriage with Diane, a woman with light blonde hair and a warm personality who clearly loved her family. Their daughter Beth was just a child, probably around the same age as the young Beth we see in Rick's later memories. Rick had his garage workshop where he tinkered with inventions, but he wasn't the scientific god he would later become. The family lived in a house that looked strikingly similar to the Breaking Bad residence, which makes sense given the parallel journeys of both main characters, ordinary men driven to become criminals by circumstances beyond their control. Rick was focused on his teleportation research, but he wasn't obsessed with it. He had time for his family and seemed to genuinely enjoy being a father and husband. This peaceful existence was built on a foundation that Rick didn't know was fragile. In other dimensions, versions of Rick had already discovered portal technology and formed organizations like the early Council of Ricks. Rick Prime, the first Rick to invent interdimensional travel, was traveling between realities and offering other Ricks the secrets of portal technology. Rick Prime's approach to other Ricks followed a pattern. He would arrive in their dimension, demonstrate his superior technology, and offer to share the secret of interdimensional travel. Most Ricks accepted immediately, abandoning their families to join what Rick Prime saw as the infinite Rick lifestyle, an existence of pure science and adventure without emotional attachments. But Rick C-137 was different. When Rick Prime appeared in his garage carrying an advanced portal gun, young Rick listened to the offer but ultimately rejected it. He saw through Rick Prime's philosophy and recognized that the infinite Rick life would be lonely and unfulfilling. Rick C-137 chose his family over unlimited power and knowledge, a decision that would define the rest of his existence. Rick Prime's arrival in Dimension C-137 started like his visits to other dimensions. He materialized in Rick's garage while Rick was working on his teleportation device, introduced himself as an alternate version of Rick, and demonstrated the portal gun technology. Rick Prime explained that he could share the secrets of interdimensional travel, giving Rick access to infinite worlds and infinite possibilities. But Rick C-137's response was unexpected. Instead of jumping at the chance for cosmic power, he thought about what such a life would really mean. Rick Prime was offering him the ability to go anywhere and do anything, but Rick realized this would require abandoning everything he cared about. He saw that Rick Prime himself had no attachments, no family, no emotional connections, just an endless pursuit of science and adventure. After some reflection, Rick C-137 made a choice that would echo through the entire series. He declined Rick Prime's offer, telling him that the infinite Rick lifestyle sounded lonely and unfulfilling. Rick C-137 decided he would rather be a different kind of Rick, one who chose family over science, love over power, and meaningful relationships over cosmic knowledge. This rejection infuriated Rick Prime. He was genuinely shocked that any version of himself would turn down unlimited power and scientific advancement. Rick Prime saw Rick C-137's attachment to family as weakness, a flaw that needed to be corrected. In Rick Prime's worldview, emotional connections were obstacles to true greatness, and he couldn't understand how any Rick could choose such limitations. Insulted and angered by what he saw as a lesser version of himself acting superior, Rick Prime left Dimension C-137, but he didn't simply move on to find other Ricks. Instead, he decided to teach Rick C-137 a lesson about the price of refusing his offer. Shortly after leaving, Rick Prime opened a portal back into Rick's garage and dropped a bomb through it. The explosion killed both Diane and young Beth instantly, while Rick C-137 was thrown clear and survived with injuries. The blast destroyed not just Rick's family, but his entire understanding of reality. In one moment, his choice to prioritize family over science resulted in losing his family completely. Rick Prime had proved his point in the cruelest way possible. Attachments make you vulnerable, and love leads to loss. The bombing left Rick C-137 physically wounded and emotionally shattered. He was taken to a hospital where he received medical treatment for his injuries, but the psychological damage was far worse than anything doctors could heal. Rick had to process the fact that his own face was responsible for his family's death, even if it belonged to a different version of himself. For an unknown period, Rick grieved alone in his empty house. The memories shown in Rick Murai Jack suggest this was a dark time where Rick struggled with depression, survivor's guilt, and rage. He was no longer the optimistic family man he had been. That version of Rick died in the explosion, along with Diane and Beth. But eventually, Rick's grief transformed into something more dangerous: determination. He decided to finish what he had started with his teleportation research, but with a completely different goal. Instead of creating technology to help people, Rick C-137 began working on interdimensional travel so he could hunt down Rick Prime and make him pay for what he had done. This decision marked the true beginning of Rick's transformation, from family man to interdimensional terrorist. Working alone in his garage, surrounded by the ghosts of his dead family, Rick managed to accomplish something that only Rick Prime had done before. He independently invented portal gun technology. This made Rick C-137 one of only 2 Ricks in the entire multiverse to figure out interdimensional travel on his own. With his portal gun complete, Rick C-137 began his quest for revenge. He started traveling through dimensions, searching for Rick Prime while killing any other Ricks who got in his way. This wasn't random violence. Rick had a method. He was using a genetic tracking system to identify Ricks who might be Rick Prime, and when they didn't match, he eliminated them to narrow down his search. The hunt consumed Rick's life for decades. He became exactly what Rick Prime had wanted: a Rick without attachments, driven purely by scientific advancement and personal goals. But instead of achieving enlightenment, Rick C-137 descended into nihilism, alcoholism, and emotional numbness. Rick's revenge quest had consequences that rippled across the entire multiverse. As he killed more and more Ricks, the surviving versions began to see him as a serious threat. Rick C-137 wasn't just murdering random people. He was systematically hunting down versions of themselves, which terrified the other Ricks into action. Eventually, the surviving Ricks organized against Rick C-137, sending teams to kill him and stop his rampage. But Rick had become too skilled and too dangerous to defeat easily. He evaded every assassination attempt and killed countless more Ricks in the process. The conflict escalated until it became a multiversal war between Rick C-137 and everyone else. The war only ended when the other Ricks surrendered and agreed to negotiate a peace treaty. This led to the formation of the Citadel of Ricks, with Rick C-137 helping to oversee its construction as part of the agreement. The Citadel represented a compromise. The Ricks would stop hunting Rick C-137, and he would stop killing them. But Rick C-137 never truly joined their organization, maintaining his status as an outsider and malcontent. The peace also led to the creation of the central finite curve, the cosmic prison that would define the rest of the series. Rick C-137 worked with other Ricks to wall off the section of the multiverse where Rick was guaranteed to be the smartest being alive. This wasn't just about ego, it was a practical way to make sure Rick Prime couldn't escape to dimensions where Rick didn't exist. But Rick Prime had already gone into hiding, using technology and strategies that kept him one step ahead of Rick C-137's hunt. Frustrated and exhausted after decades of searching, Rick eventually gave up his active pursuit of Rick Prime. He had failed in his quest for revenge, and the failure ate away at him. This led to Rick's decision to abandon the Citadel and settle down with a replacement family. He found Rick Prime's original dimension, the same reality where the show takes place, and moved in with that dimension's Beth, Jerry, Summer, and Morty. Rick Prime had abandoned his family 20 years earlier, so Rick C-137 took his place, hoping that Rick Prime might someday return to his original home. Living with this replacement family didn't heal Rick's emotional wounds, but it gave him something he hadn't had since the bombing, people to care about, even if he couldn't admit it to himself. The Beth he lived with wasn't his original daughter, but she was still a version of the child he had lost. Morty wasn't his biological grandson, but Rick could still see potential in him. Rick's origin story explains many of his character traits throughout the series. His alcoholism and nihilism stem from the trauma of losing his family and failing to get revenge. His need to be the smartest person in every room comes from the knowledge that intelligence is the only thing that kept him alive during his war against the other Ricks. His reluctance to form emotional attachments reflects his fear of experiencing another loss, like Diane and Beth. The story also recontextualizes Rick's relationship with his current family. Every moment of genuine care or protection Rick shows toward Morty, Summer, Beth, or even Jerry is a victory over the trauma that Rick Prime inflicted on him. Despite everything he's been through, Rick C-137 still has the capacity to love. He's just terrified of admitting it, because love made him vulnerable to the worst pain he's ever experienced. Rick's origin reveals that he wasn't born evil or selfish. He became the Rickest Rick through a combination of tragedy, trauma, and the impossible choices forced on him by Rick Prime's cruelty. The family man who chose love over power is still somewhere inside Rick C-137, buried under decades of pain and cynicism, but occasionally visible in the moments when Rick's guard comes down and he shows genuine care for the people around him. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Evil Morty's rise, from eye patch to president. Evil Morty started as just another Morty from Dimension 79.cv who was constantly mistreated and dragged on dangerous adventures by his Rick. But one day, after being pushed too far during a heated argument where his Rick told him to quit if he didn't like their adventures, Evil Morty decided to take control. He got his Rick blackout drunk, created a mind control device hidden under a black eye patch, and turned his grandfather into a remote-controlled puppet, beginning a years-long plan that would end with him becoming the most powerful being in the multiverse. For the first season of Rick and Morty, Evil Morty appeared to be nothing more than a silent sidekick to an evil Rick, who was murdering other Ricks and kidnapping their Mortys. The character seemed like a typical victim, just another Morty being dragged along on his Rick's violent schemes. This impression was carefully crafted to hide the truth about who was really in control. The relationship between Evil Morty and his original Rick followed the same toxic pattern that defines most Rick-Morty relationships. Evil Morty was forced to accompany his Rick on dangerous adventures across the multiverse, constantly put in life-threatening situations, and treated as expendable. Rick saw Morty as nothing more than a tool for camouflaging his genius brainwaves and a punching bag for his frustrations. What made Evil Morty different from other Mortys wasn't his intelligence, though he was clearly smarter than average, but his refusal to accept the cycle of abuse that defines Rick-Morty relationships. While most Mortys either break under the pressure or learn to cope with their trauma, Evil Morty chose a third option: revenge and liberation. The moment that changed everything came after what seemed like just another dangerous adventure gone wrong. Evil Morty and his Rick got into a heated argument about their relationship, with Evil Morty finally expressing his frustration with being constantly endangered and mistreated. Rick's response was typical of his character, dismissive and cruel. He told Evil Morty that if he didn't like their adventures, he should just quit. This response revealed the fundamental cruelty of Rick's worldview. Rick knew that Morty couldn't actually quit because Morty depended on him for survival, protection, and even basic necessities. Rick was essentially telling Morty to abandon everything he knew and everyone he cared about, just because he didn't want to deal with complaints about his behavior. Evil Morty's response to Rick's challenge was unlike anything any other Morty had attempted. Instead of backing down or accepting his situation, Evil Morty decided to take Rick's words literally. He would quit, but not in the way Rick expected. Evil Morty began planning something that no other Morty had ever accomplished: taking control of a Rick. The plan required Evil Morty to develop skills that most Mortys never acquire. He had to understand Rick's technology well enough to create a mind control device, master the engineering needed to surgically implant cybernetic controls, and develop the strategic thinking necessary to turn Rick into a puppet without anyone discovering the truth. Evil Morty's approach was methodical and patient. He left the argument as if he was giving up, then offered his Rick a drink as a peace offering. This seemingly innocent gesture was actually the first step in Evil Morty's takeover plan. Evil Morty had calculated exactly how much alcohol Rick would need to consume to become completely unconscious and helpless. While Rick was passed out drunk, Evil Morty performed surgery on his grandfather's brain, implanting sophisticated cybernetic controls that would allow him to control Rick's every word and action remotely. The control device was hidden under a black eye patch that Evil Morty wore constantly, making it appear like he had suffered some injury, rather than revealing it as the most powerful weapon in the multiverse. The transformation was complete when Rick woke up. Rick thought he was still in control of his own life, but every decision he made, every word he spoke, and every action he took was actually being controlled by Evil Morty. Rick had become a sophisticated puppet, and Evil Morty was pulling all the strings while maintaining the appearance of being an innocent, silent sidekick. Evil Morty's control over Rick wasn't just physical, it was psychological torture. Rick retained enough awareness to know something was wrong, but couldn't figure out what was happening to him. At times, Rick would try to assert his own will, but the cybernetic implants would force him back into compliance. Rick even attempted suicide to escape Evil Morty's control, but the implants prevented him from succeeding. Once Evil Morty had complete control over his Rick, he began executing a plan that was far more sophisticated than simple revenge. Evil Morty used his puppet Rick to travel to the Citadel and erase all records of both himself and his Rick from their database, effectively making them invisible to the most powerful organization in the multiverse. With his identity hidden, Evil Morty began a campaign of multiversal terrorism that would eventually frame Rick C-137 for his crimes. Using his controlled Rick, Evil Morty murdered 27 Ricks from different dimensions and kidnapped hundreds of Mortys. But this wasn't random violence. It was a carefully planned operation, designed to gather intelligence about the Citadel and draw Rick C-137 into his trap. Evil Morty set up a base of operations on a planet outside normal Citadel surveillance, where he imprisoned the kidnapped Mortys in torture devices. The constant pain these Mortys experienced generated the Morty waves, necessary to hide his controlled Rick's genius brain signatures from Citadel detection systems. Evil Morty was essentially using other versions of himself as a cloaking device to hide his activities. The ultimate goal of this operation was to capture Rick C-137 and scan his brain for information about the Citadel's construction and the central finite curve. Evil Morty had discovered that there was something fundamentally wrong with the multiverse they were living in, and he suspected that Rick C-137 held the key to understanding what that was. Evil Morty's trap worked perfectly. When Rick C-137 was framed for the murders and tracked down Evil Rick's location, he walked directly into Evil Morty's facility. The brain scanning process began, giving Evil Morty crucial information about Rick C-137's memories and knowledge. However, the scan was interrupted when the imprisoned Mortys rebelled and killed Evil Rick. The rebellion was led by Morty Prime, who convinced the other Mortys that they had the power to fight back against their oppressors. This moment was ironic because Evil Morty, who had already proven that a Morty could defeat a Rick, watched as another Morty inspired their fellow victims to rise up against their captor. The imprisoned Mortys beat Evil Rick to death, finally ending his suffering. When Citadel forces arrived to investigate, they discovered the cybernetic implants in Evil Rick's brain and realized he had been controlled remotely. But they never identified who had been controlling him. Evil Morty simply removed his eye patch, destroyed the transmitter device, and blended in with the rescued Mortys as they were relocated to the Citadel. Evil Morty's first plan had failed to achieve its primary objective. He hadn't been able to complete the brain scan of Rick C-137, DSE, but he had gained valuable intelligence and successfully infiltrated the Citadel. More importantly, he had proven to himself that his ultimate goal was achievable. A Morty really could outsmart and control a Rick. Living on the Citadel gave Evil Morty access to vast resources and information about how the multiversal government actually operated. He observed the class system that kept Mortys as second-class citizens, the breeding programs that artificially created families to produce more Mortys, and the corruption that allowed Ricks to maintain power while treating Mortys as disposable tools. Evil Morty also learned about the central finite curve during this period, discovering that the multiverse he lived in was actually a carefully curated prison designed to ensure Rick's dominance. This knowledge fueled his determination to escape, but he realized he would need far more power and resources than a single controlled Rick could provide. The destruction of the original Citadel government by Rick Cone, 137 inches, the Rickshank Rickdemption, created the perfect opportunity for Evil Morty's next phase. With the Council of Ricks dead and the Citadel in chaos, a new democratic government was being established. For the first time in Citadel history, there would be elections where even Mortys could potentially participate in government. Evil Morty recognized this transition as his chance to gain the institutional power he needed to complete his ultimate plan. Instead of working from the shadows as a terrorist, he could potentially take control of the entire Citadel government and use its vast resources to break free from the central finite curve. Evil Morty's campaign for president of the Citadel was a masterpiece of political manipulation. Running as the candidate for the Morty Party, he positioned himself as the voice of the oppressed Morty underclass, while carefully hiding his true identity and intentions from both his supporters and his opponents. The campaign presented Evil Morty as Candidate Morty, a charismatic politician who promised to address the systemic inequality between Ricks and Mortys on the Citadel. His speeches resonated with Mortys who had suffered under Rick dominance, and he gained surprising momentum despite being considered a joke candidate by most Ricks. Evil Morty's political skills were as impressive as his technological abilities. He understood how to appeal to different constituencies, how to deflect criticism, and how to present himself as both an outsider fighting the system and a competent leader capable of governing. His most impressive speech addressed the class divide between Ricks and Mortys, calling out the systemic oppression that kept Mortys in subservient positions. The election campaign also revealed Evil Morty's ruthlessness in dealing with threats to his plans. When his campaign manager began to suspect his true identity, Evil Morty arranged for him to receive classified documents that confirmed his suspicions. But instead of allowing this information to reach the public, Evil Morty had his campaign manager assassinated after he attempted to expose the truth. Evil Morty's victory in the election was narrow but decisive. He immediately began consolidating power by eliminating any Rick who might oppose his agenda. The Shadow Council of Ricks, which had been the real power behind the Citadel government, was executed en masse when they tried to explain that the president was supposed to be just a figurehead. As President Morty, Evil Morty implemented reforms that appeared to benefit Mortys while secretly building the infrastructure he needed for his escape plan. He changed police policies to give Mortys more authority, modified school systems to reduce Rick dominance, and created new employment opportunities for Rickless Mortys. These changes made him popular with his Morty constituents, while providing cover for his real activities. The most important aspect of Evil Morty's presidency was the construction of a massive device hidden beneath the Citadel that could overload the dimensional drive and punch a hole through the central finite curve. This project required enormous resources and the sacrifice of countless Ricks and Mortys. But Evil Morty was willing to pay any price for his freedom. Evil Morty's rise from an abused Morty to the most powerful being in the multiverse represents a complete inversion of the Rick-Morty power dynamic. He proved that intelligence and determination could overcome the systemic advantages that Ricks enjoyed, and that even the most oppressive systems could be manipulated and ultimately destroyed by someone willing to think beyond their assigned role. The success of Evil Morty's plan also revealed the fundamental weakness of Rick's entire worldview. Rick believed that intelligence automatically granted superiority and that emotional attachments were weaknesses to be exploited. But Evil Morty showed that someone who understood both intelligence and emotion could outmaneuver even the smartest Rick by using Rick's own arrogance and assumptions against him. Evil Morty's transformation from victim to victor demonstrates that the cycle of abuse that defines Rick-Morty relationships isn't inevitable. While most Mortys either accept their suffering or are broken by it, Evil Morty chose to break the system itself. His rise to power represents hope for every Morty who has ever been mistreated by a Rick, even if his methods were brutal and his ultimate goal was purely selfish. The destruction of the Citadel and Evil Morty's escape from the central finite curve marked the end of the Rick-dominated era and the beginning of something entirely new. Evil Morty had achieved what no other being in the multiverse thought possible. He had broken free from Rick's control and opened the door to infinite possibilities beyond Rick's influence. His rise from eye-patch-wearing sidekick to president of the multiverse's most powerful government proves that even in a reality designed to ensure Rick's dominance, a sufficiently determined Morty can still change everything. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have the Citadel of Ricks, Rise and Fall of a Multiversal Government. The Citadel of Ricks was a trans-dimensional citadel city-state inhabited entirely by Ricks and Mortys from across infinite realities, representing one of the most complex governmental experiments in the multiverse. This massive space station served as both sanctuary and prison for thousands of alternate versions of Rick Sanchez and their Morty companions, ultimately becoming a cautionary tale about power, corruption, and the dangers of unchecked genius. The Citadel was formed as a secret entity serving to protect Ricks and Mortys from a multitude of accumulated enemies within the galaxy, including Rick C-137 and the Galactic Federation. The need for such protection arose from Rick's universal reputation as a threat to established order. As Rick explained to Morty, "I've got a lot of enemies in the universe that consider my genius a threat. Galactic terrorists, a few subgalactic dictators, most of the entire intergalactic government." The concept emerged when thousands of alternate Ricks faced similar persecution across their respective dimensions. A few thousand alternate versions of Rick decided to join together and create their own society, pooling their collective intelligence and resources to build an impenetrable fortress in a pocket dimension. This location existed outside the normal flow of reality, accessible only through specific coordinates that required advanced portal technology to reach. The central finite curve played a crucial role in the Citadel's existence. This concept was first mentioned in close Rick counters of the Rick kind, but only fully explained years later. The curve essentially walled off every universe where Rick was the smartest being from the rest of the infinite multiverse, creating a controlled environment where Ricks could maintain their intellectual supremacy without facing truly superior minds. The Citadel's origins were far more violent than most inhabitants realized. In its early stages, this society came into conflict with Rick C-137, who began killing many of its members as he hunted for Rick Prime, the Rick he believed to have killed his family. This period of bloodshed created the foundation for everything that followed, as Rick C-137's rampage forced the other Ricks to band together for mutual protection. After C-137 had killed a great many of his counterparts, he and the Alliance brokered a peace treaty, one that saw C-137 help design and construct the Citadel. This collaboration created one of the most sophisticated structures in the multiverse, a city capable of housing millions of beings and equipped with advanced technology beyond most civilizations' comprehension. The Citadel's population structure revealed deep-seated inequalities from its inception. Mortys were revealed to be mass-produced as clones in the Citadel to be dispatched to Ricks as sidekicks and cloaking devices to hide Ricks from dangers. This industrial-scale clone production turned living beings into commodities, with Mortys being imbued with desirable subservient traits, described as being bred for forgiveness. The city developed all the trappings of a functioning society, complete with businesses, schools, law enforcement, and entertainment. Vendors sold Morty accessories, insurance salespeople hawked protection plans, and various Rick entrepreneurs capitalized on the Morty trade. Yet beneath this veneer of civilization lay fundamental structural problems that would eventually lead to the Citadel's downfall. The Citadel's first major crisis arrived during the events documented in close Rick counters of the Rick kind, when 27 Ricks from different timelines were murdered and their respective Mortys kidnapped. The Transdimensional Council of Ricks ordered the arrest of Rick C-137, accusing him of the crimes due to his refusal to participate in their affairs. This investigation revealed the existence of evil Rick and evil Morty, though the true scope of the threat remained hidden. The evil Rick and Morty capture Rick and Morty C-137, with evil Rick taking Rick C-137 to have his brain downloaded. The rescue came through an unlikely source when Morty C-137 led a rebellion of alternate Mortys, held prisoner in the base, and released Rick. The most shocking revelation came after the crisis seemingly ended. Soldier Ricks discovered that evil Rick, killed by the Mortys in the rebellion, was a mindless cyborg being controlled remotely. Even more disturbing was the identity of the controller. As the Morty prisoners board the refugee ships, evil Morty removes his eye patch, evil Rick's controller stomps on it, and blends into the crowd. This event introduced a Morty who possessed intelligence rivaling the Ricks themselves, fundamentally challenging the established order where Mortys were considered intellectually inferior and naturally subservient. Evil Morty's infiltration of the Citadel as a refugee would prove to be the beginning of a long-term plan that would reshape the entire government. The Citadel faced its first destruction in the Rickshank Rickdemption. Rick reveals to Morty that he had himself captured on purpose in order to take revenge on both the Galactic Federation and Jerry for crossing him. As part of his escape plan, Rick transported the entire Citadel into a Galactic Federation prison, causing mayhem and destruction. This brazen act eliminated the Council of Ricks and forced the survivors to rebuild their society from scratch. The destruction and subsequent rebuilding of the Citadel marked a fundamental shift in its governmental structure. Following the assassination of the Council of Ricks by Rick C-137, the Ricks and Mortys of the Citadel decided to act as more of a democracy and elect their next president. This transition from oligarchy to democracy seemed progressive on the surface, but created new vulnerabilities. Of the candidates made up of different Ricks, there was one Morty who decided to run for president. This Morty candidate promised equality between the Ricks and Mortys of the Citadel, giving Mortys more of an identity beyond being Rick's sidekick. The campaign resonated with the oppressed Morty population, who had long suffered under Rick's supremacy. The election revealed deep societal divisions within the Citadel. The episode's examination of the Citadel's internal society showed it had all the same societal and institutional problems as Earth: inequality, prejudice, corruption, and a deeply divided class system. Police corruption was rampant, workers struggled with inadequate wages, and crime flourished in neglected districts like Mortytown. Meanwhile, the darker aspects of Citadel society continued operating behind the scenes. At a factory producing Simple Rick's wafers, flavored with positive neurochemicals from the titular Simple Rick's memories, employee Rick J22 went on a rampage after being passed over for a promotion. This incident highlighted how even the Ricks themselves faced exploitation and dehumanization within the system they had created. The election culminated with an unprecedented victory, the first Morty president in Citadel history. However, after a Morty was elected president, that Morty was revealed to be Evil Morty, and he had big plans for the Citadel. The population had unknowingly placed their greatest enemy in the highest office. Evil Morty's presidency began with swift and brutal consolidation of power. The newly dubbed President Morty met with Rick leaders on a shadow council of Ricks, who told him that they were the real power in the Citadel. He asked for those who felt this way to raise their hands. He snapped his fingers, and all the Ricks with raised hands were swiftly executed. This massacre eliminated any organized opposition to his rule and established him as an absolute dictator. Evil Morty then set his plans into motion by eliminating the old school that partnered Mortys with Ricks, creating new Citadel police rules that allowed a Rick police officer to go free after killing his Morty partner, and turning himself into a dictator. These systematic changes dismantled the existing social order while preparing for his ultimate goal: escape from the central finite curve. The true scope of Evil Morty's plan became clear in Rick Murai Jack. President Morty revealed he kept the partially completed brain scan Evil Rick took from Rick C 137 years earlier, and had used it to solve the equation needed to break free from the central finite curve. His entire political career had been a means to acquire the resources and knowledge necessary for this escape. The final destruction of the Citadel was both methodical and apocalyptic. Evil Morty initiated a master hack, disabling all portal guns except for a massive, golden one for his own escape. He powered the device to break through central finite curve by using the blood of countless Ricks and Mortys, who were rerouted by his hack of Operation Phoenix, and blended into portal fuel. In Rick Murai Jack, the Citadel was ultimately destroyed after Evil Morty set off a chain reaction of events that killed all the Ricks and most of the Mortys in the Citadel, and ultimately exploded after Evil Morty broke through. The central finite curve. The scale of destruction was unprecedented, effectively committing genocide against the entire Citadel population to fuel one being's quest for freedom. Very few survived this cataclysm. The only confirmed survivors were Rick C 137 and our Morty, who managed to escape in a small section of the Citadel just before its final destruction, and Evil Morty, who successfully escaped through his golden portal into the wider, unknown multiverse. The aftermath revealed the true nature of the central finite curve as a self-imposed prison. Evil Morty's entire motivation was to escape this narcissistic playground and venture into the real multiverse, a place of unknown possibilities and dangers. His success in breaking the curve opened pathways for beings potentially smarter than Rick to enter their reality, fundamentally altering the balance of power in the multiverse. Following the Citadel's destruction, the remains became a refugee shelter for cloned Ricks and Mortys created in the Citadel, who were teleported there after the portal reset because they didn't have a home reality to return to. These survivors faced a harsh existence in the ruins, struggling to rebuild any semblance of civilization from the ashes of their former society. Recent developments showed continued attempts at reconstruction. In The Rick, the Mort, and the Ugly, one of the Rick clones, Boss Hog Rick, attempted to rebuild a new citadel out of the ruins of the old one. However, this all came crashing down when Homesteader Rick destroyed the under-construction citadel and killed Boss Hog Rick and all of his workers in order to give his enslaved cloned Mortys a chance at life without Ricks. The Citadel of Ricks ultimately served as a microcosm of the broader Rick and Morty universe's themes about power, intelligence, and the corrupting nature of unchecked authority. What began as a sanctuary for the multiverse's greatest minds devolved into a dystopian society built on exploitation and suffering. The cycle of creation, corruption, and destruction continues to repeat, suggesting that perhaps some fundamental flaws in Rick's worldview make any lasting civilization impossible. Evil Morty's escape represented more than just one being's liberation. It shattered the illusion that Rick's intelligence made him supreme in the infinite cosmos. The golden portals leading beyond the central finite curve open possibilities that the show's creators have only begun to explore, leaving the ultimate legacy of the Citadel's rise and fall as a story still being written across the infinite expanse of Rick and Morty's multiverse. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the Galactic Federation, Oppression Across the Stars. The Galactic Federation in Rick and Morty represents the ultimate form of cosmic authoritarianism, a vast interstellar government that controls thousands of planets and enforces its rule through surveillance, military force, and deep undercover operations designed to eliminate anyone who dares resist their control. First appearing in the show's pilot episode when Rick and Morty pass through interdimensional customs, the Galactic Federation started as background world building that grew into one of the series' main antagonistic forces. This massive organization, founded and primarily ruled by insect-like creatures called Gromflamites, controlled 6,048 Earth-like planets across the universe. The Federation operated like a cosmic version of an authoritarian state, complete with its own currency system called Blemflarks, a complex bureaucracy, and military forces stationed throughout space. Rick Sanchez had a long history with the Federation that predated the show's events. Along with his closest allies, Birdperson and Squanchy, Rick fought as a rebel against the Federation's control for years, committing what the government called atrocities in their fight to free planets from Federation rule. These three freedom fighters became some of the most wanted criminals in the universe, with the Federation desperately trying to capture them for decades. The organization's reach was so vast that they established customs checkpoints between dimensions, monitoring interdimensional travel and searching for fugitives like Rick. The Federation's control system went beyond simple military occupation. They created a society where citizens were assigned jobs, given complimentary antidepressants, and kept in line through a combination of surveillance and social engineering. When Earth eventually joined the Federation at the end of Season 2, humans experienced this firsthand as alien tourists flooded the planet, and Jerry Smith was immediately assigned a job by the new government. Throughout the first 2 seasons, the Federation's presence slowly intensified from a distant threat to an immediate danger. The pilot episode showed Rick's fear of their customs agents, forcing Morty to hide megaseeds in his rectum to avoid detection. This early encounter established that Rick, despite his godlike intelligence and abilities, still had to be careful around Federation authority. Season 2 built this tension masterfully. References to Rick's terrorist past against the Federation appeared in episodes, painting a picture of a decades-long conflict. The organization wasn't just hunting Rick for petty crimes. He represented an existential threat to their entire system of control. They wanted his portal gun technology desperately, as interdimensional travel remained outside their capabilities, despite their advanced technology in other areas. The Federation's methods became increasingly sinister as the show progressed. They didn't just use brute force. They employed long-term psychological operations that would make any intelligence agency proud. The most shocking example was Tammy, who posed as a regular high school student at Harry Herpson High School, becoming Summer's friend and eventually Birdperson's girlfriend. This wasn't a quick undercover job. Tammy spent potentially years building her cover identity, integrating into Earth society, and working her way into the rebels' inner circle. The wedding invitation that arrived at the Smith house in The Wedding Squanchers seemed innocent enough. Birdperson, Rick's best friend from his rebellion days, was marrying Tammy on planet Squanch. Rick initially refused to attend, calling weddings basically funerals with cake, but when Jerry accidentally got transported to the wedding planet, the whole family had to go. What should have been a celebration became the Federation's most ambitious trap. The wedding reception started beautifully. Rick, following Morty's advice to open up emotionally, gave an uncharacteristically heartfelt toast about friendship and love, declaring Birdperson his best friend and promising to embark on his greatest adventure yet, opening himself up to others. The other wedding guests, many of them fellow rebels and criminals, celebrated what seemed like a genuine moment of happiness in their dangerous lives. Then Tammy took the microphone for her own speech. She started normally enough, joking about being a high school senior, marrying a 40-year-old bird alien. But her tone shifted dramatically as she revealed the truth. In a lot of ways, what I really am is a deep cover agent for the Galactic Federation. And you guys are a group of wanted criminals. And this entire building is in a certain sense surrounded. The transformation was instant and brutal. Tammy pulled out a pulse rifle and shot Birdperson multiple times in front of everyone, his body crumpling to the ground as Rick screamed in horror. Federation forces stormed the building from all sides, and the wedding erupted into a war zone. Guests pulled out weapons and fought back, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. The Federation had planned this perfectly, gathering all their most wanted targets in one location for a massacre. Squanchy, Rick's other close friend, transformed himself into a massive muscular beast to buy time for Rick's family to escape, likely dying in the process. Tammy cornered Rick and demanded his portal gun, which he seemingly surrendered before revealing he had rigged it to explode, killing several Federation agents and temporarily deafening Tammy. The Smith family barely escaped the planet as friends and allies fell around them. The escape itself became a dark comedy of errors. Rick took his family searching for a new planet to call home, but each one proved impossible. One had a screaming sun that never stopped. Another was the Cobb planet, where literally everything down to the atoms was on a cob, which inexplicably terrified Rick more than anything they'd seen. They finally settled on a tiny planet, so small that Rick could walk to the South Pole in under a minute. On the tiny planet, the family tried to process what had happened. Earth was no longer safe. The Federation would be watching for them there. They were now refugees, forced to live in hiding because of Rick's past. Jerry, frustrated and scared, suggested they return to Earth and turn Rick in to the authorities, arguing that Rick's selfishness had ruined their lives. But Beth, Summer, and Morty defended Rick, saying they loved him despite his flaws and wanted to stay together as a family. Unknown to them, Rick was hiding beneath their house's floor, listening to every word. This conversation became the turning point that changed everything. Rick left the planet under the pretense of getting ice cream, but instead contacted the Federation directly. In a moment that shocked viewers, Rick Sanchez, the man who never cared about anyone or anything, negotiated his own surrender in exchange for his family's freedom. The Federation agreed to his terms. When the family was rescued and returned to Earth, they found their planet transformed. The Federation had taken over completely. Alien tourists walked the streets taking photos. Federation robots handed out pills. And Jerry was immediately assigned a job through the Ministry of Employment. Earth had become just another controlled world in the Federation's empire. Rick was taken to a maximum security prison on a distant planet, charged with everything and seemingly defeated. But Rick's defeat was actually his greatest con. In the Season 3 premiere, The Rickshank Rickdemption, it was revealed that Rick had planned his capture all along. When Federation agent Cornelius Daniel entered Rick's mind to steal the portal gun formula, Rick uploaded a virus that gave him complete control of their systems. He then orchestrated a massive prison riot by teleporting the entire Citadel of Ricks into Federation space, causing a war between the two most powerful organizations in the universe. While Ricks and Gromflamites fought each other, Rixie 137 accessed the Federation's central computer and changed the value of their currency from 1 to 0. This single action destroyed their entire civilization with worthless money. The Federation president immediately committed suicide, soldiers turned on each other, and the organization collapsed into complete anarchy within hours. The Federation's collapse sent shockwaves across the universe. Thousands of planets were suddenly free from their control, but also lost whatever stability the government had provided. Earth returned to human control, though some people like Jerry actually missed the structure and certainty the Federation had provided. The power vacuum left by the Federation's fall created new opportunities for other threats to emerge. Tammy survived the wedding massacre and the Federation's collapse, taking control of the remaining forces and declaring them the new Galactic Federation. This remnant organization, while much weaker than the original, continued to hunt Rick and his family. In Season 4's finale, Star Mort Rickturn of the Jerry, Tammy returned with her forces and a converted Birdperson, now called Phoenixperson, turned into a cyborg weapon against his will. This confrontation revealed even deeper layers to the Federation's cruelty. They hadn't just killed Birdperson, they had resurrected and brainwashed him, turning Rick's best friend into a tool for their revenge. The battle ended with Rick finally killing Tammy, seemingly ending the new Galactic Federation's threat once and for all. The Gromflamites themselves continued to be a presence in the series, though more as individual actors than an organized force. Season 8 finally brought some resolution to this long conflict, when Spacebeth helped broker a peace treaty between the Gromflamite survivors and the rebellion forces, officially ending the war that had defined so much of Rick's life. The Federation's rise and fall fundamentally changed how Rick and Morty operated as a show. Before their collapse, Rick had to be somewhat careful, avoiding certain dimensions and keeping a low profile when necessary. After destroying them, Rick became even more reckless and powerful, having eliminated one of the few forces in the universe that could threaten him. The Federation also revealed crucial aspects of Rick's character. Despite his claims of not caring about anything, Rick had once fought in a rebellion for freedom, had genuine friendships with Birdperson and Squanchy, and ultimately sacrificed himself to save his family. His destruction of the Federation wasn't just about his own freedom, it was revenge for Birdperson and payback for forcing him to abandon his family. The organization represented everything Rick hated about authority and control. They turned free worlds into regulated colonies, assigned people jobs, whether they wanted them or not, and used manipulation and surveillance to maintain power. In many ways, the Federation was the anti-Rick, 9, organized where he was chaotic, controlling where he was free, collective where he was individual. Their use of deep cover agents like Tammy showed how far authoritarian regimes would go to maintain control. Tammy spent years pretending to be a teenager, forming fake friendships, even entering a romantic relationship with Birdperson, all to serve the state. The revelation of her true nature was one of the show's darkest moments, showing that, in the Federation's world, even love could be weaponized. The Federation's temporary control of Earth also served as a commentary on how easily freedom could be lost. Humans adjusted quickly to their new alien overlords, taking their pills and accepting their assigned jobs. Jerry even seemed happier under Federation rule, suggesting that some people prefer security and structure over freedom and responsibility. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Birdperson and the Rebellion, freedom fighters against authority. Birdperson stands as one of Rick Sanchez's closest friends and most trusted allies in the ongoing fight against the Galactic Federation's authoritarian rule across the universe. Rick, Birdperson, and Squanchy were once freedom fighters against the Galactic Federation's oppression, with their resistance activities leading the Federation to brand them as terrorists and issue warrants for their arrests. The Galactic Federation was a major galactic organization that controlled significant areas of the universe, founded and ruled by the bug-like Gromflamites, and including members of many other species. Rick and Birdperson first met at an alien music festival called Birding Menapalooza Flargabarg, where Rick was distributing free hallucinogenic drugs. At this intergalactic festival, Rick, Birdperson, and Squanchy became so intoxicated on a substance called synthol diesempathate that they decided to form an impromptu rock band called the Flesh Curtains. They performed their first concert at the music festival and continued performing for several years, with photos from their concerts at venues like Plip Plap Arena in the Dringus Array, later hanging on Birdperson's wall. During this period, Rick had become a weapons dealer while searching for the Rick who murdered his family, trying to find parts for a device to help him track down his family's killer. The friendship that formed between these three unlikely companions would evolve far beyond music. The Galactic Federation had been controlling significant portions of the universe for over 850 Glagners, helping quintillions of sentient life forms assimilate into their vision of one united universe. However, this assimilation came at the cost of individual freedom and planetary autonomy. Rick, Birdperson, and Squanchy eventually formed the core of what became known as the Resistance against the Galactic Federation. The revolt involved numerous species who had grown tired of the Federation's paternalistic surveillance state system that combined mandatory monitoring and resource rationing with what they called universal healthcare and a mandated jobs program. What started as a friendship forged through music and shared consciousness-altering experiences transformed into a rebellion against the most powerful authority in the known universe. The three friends transitioned from playing music together to actively fighting against the Galactic Federation's oppressive control over countless worlds. Rick Sanchez, Birdperson, and Squanchy became known rebels against the organization, fighting numerous battles to free various planets from Federation control and committing many actions that the Federation classified as atrocities. The Federation's perspective painted them as dangerous terrorists, but to the oppressed populations across the galaxy, they represented hope for freedom. The rebellion grew in both scope and intensity as more species joined their cause. According to Federation records, Rick's behavior during the conflict was particularly brutal, with witnesses describing his sadistic behavior and complete disregard for protocol set forth in the Blabbato Accords. This mainly involved what Federation accounts described as Rick teabagging dying and wounded Gromflamite soldiers, or, as one witness put it, rubbing his human lower danglers on the faces of dying Federation forces. The resistance operations became increasingly sophisticated and daring. Squanchy fought alongside Rick and Birdperson as part of the Freedom Fighters crew, with his unique ability to transform into a berserker form, making him a formidable warrior against Federation forces. The fighting was described by those who participated as, indeed, very badass, with a friend named Geardude also fighting alongside them during the campaign. As the conflict escalated, both sides prepared for what would become the defining moment of the entire rebellion. The Federation concentrated their forces for a major offensive, while Rick and his allies gathered their own troops for what they knew would be a decisive confrontation. The stage was set for the Battle of Blood Ridge, a conflict that would determine the fate of countless worlds and the future of the resistance movement itself. The Battle of Blood Ridge took place on Glapflap's third moon, where Rick and Birdperson led the rebellion against the Galactic Federation's Gromflamite forces in what became the most significant confrontation of the entire war. The battle was fought on a red-soaked desert planet, with Rick, Birdperson, Squanchy, and their allies facing off against overwhelming Federation forces. Despite the odds, the Battle of Blood Ridge proved to be a massive success for the Resistance, with Rick and Birdperson fighting side by side as best friends in an epic display of combat effectiveness. The two warriors fought with intense intimacy and coordination, at one point hugging and spinning around in a circle in the air while simultaneously shooting enemy forces. The battle showcased not only their military prowess but also the deep bond that had formed between them since their first meeting at the music festival. Squanchy participated in the battle as part of the Freedom Fighters crew, using his combat abilities alongside his friends to help secure victory against the Federation forces. The Resistance fighters employed superior tactics and determination, ultimately overwhelming the Federation's military might, despite being significantly outnumbered. The victory at Blood Ridge represented more than just a military triumph. It demonstrated that the Federation, despite its vast resources and technological superiority, could be defeated by determined freedom fighters, willing to sacrifice everything for their cause. The battle became legendary among Resistance members and sympathizers across the galaxy, inspiring hope that the Federation's stranglehold on the universe could be broken. However, the true significance of Blood Ridge would only become apparent in its aftermath, when the personal cost of victory became clear to those who had fought hardest for it. After winning the Battle of Blood Ridge, Rick made a revelation that would fundamentally change his relationship with Birdperson forever. With the battle won, Rick revealed to Birdperson that he possessed the technology to travel throughout the multiverse and invited his closest friend to join him on adventures across infinite realities. When Birdperson asked why Rick had helped him and joined the battle if nothing truly mattered in an infinite multiverse, Rick explained that he did it to earn his friend's respect, and because Birdperson mattered to him. However, Birdperson was unimpressed by Rick's nihilistic worldview and rejected the offer to travel the multiverse together, stating that such adventures would not be worth compromising his integrity. Birdperson's rejection deeply hurt Rick, who had hoped that their shared victory and bond would convince his friend to abandon everything and explore infinite realities with him. Rick left Birdperson behind in a huff with his feelings severely damaged, though they would eventually reconcile and maintain their friendship for decades afterward. Instead of joining Rick, Birdperson gave him a beacon to call for assistance if he ever needed help, showing that despite his rejection of Rick's offer, he still cared deeply about their friendship. Hurt by Birdperson's refusal, Rick left to continue his personal quest for revenge against the Rick who had murdered his family. The immediate aftermath of Blood Ridge marked the beginning of the end for the rebellion as an organized force. With Rick departing and the core leadership fragmenting, the resistance gradually lost its cohesion and effectiveness. Though individual members would continue fighting Federation control in smaller, less coordinated efforts, the Battle of Blood Ridge had profound and lasting consequences that extended far beyond the immediate military victory. The battle and its aftermath proved to be a defining moment for Rick that revealed the tragic nature of his existence and established patterns that would affect his relationships for decades to come. Rick's experience of having Birdperson reject his offer to travel together, despite their deep friendship, contributed to his increasingly jaded and nihilistic worldview. The rejection at Blood Ridge helps explain why Rick later demanded 100 years of adventures when the series began, as Birdperson represented the partner he actually wanted for those adventures, rather than being forced to rely on his grandson Morty. Unlike Birdperson, Morty lacks the power and agency to truly walk away from Rick when needed, making him a replacement for the friend who chose integrity over adventure. Years later, the consequences of the rebellion would come back to haunt all three former freedom fighters. At Birdperson's wedding to Tammy, what should have been a celebration of love became a devastating betrayal. Tammy revealed herself as a deep-cover Galactic Federation agent who had been gathering intelligence on the Resistance members for years. She shot Birdperson multiple times with a laser weapon while Federation troops arrived to arrest the wedding guests they classified as terrorists. The wedding ambush represented the Federation's ultimate revenge against the rebels who had humiliated them at Blood Ridge. Squanchy transformed into his berserker form to fight off the Federation forces, while Rick escaped with his family, but Birdperson appeared to die from his wounds. However, death would not be the end for Rick's closest friend. The Federation converted Birdperson's corpse into a cyborg called Phoenixperson, using advanced technology to resurrect him as a weapon under their control. This represented perhaps the cruelest irony of all. The freedom fighter, who had rejected Rick's offer to travel infinite realities, became a slave to the very authority they had fought against. When Phoenixperson eventually confronted Rick, he accused his former friend of always being selfish and harmful to those around him. The transformation of Birdperson into Phoenixperson demonstrated how the Federation's revenge extended beyond simple execution. They sought to corrupt and weaponize the very symbols of resistance that had once threatened their authority. By turning the rebellion's moral center into an instrument of oppression, they aimed to break the spirit of anyone who might consider following in the rebels' footsteps. Rick eventually managed to restore Birdperson to his original form by entering his friend's mind and confronting the psychological damage caused by years of trauma and manipulation. However, their reunion was complicated by the revelation that Birdperson had a daughter with Tammy, a child who was now in Federation custody. Rick's decision to initially hide this information from Birdperson during his recovery process created new tension between the old friends. The discovery of his daughter gave Birdperson a new purpose beyond his relationship with Rick. Rather than resuming their friendship where it had left off, Birdperson chose to leave and rescue his child from Federation control. This decision echoed his original rejection of Rick's offer after Blood Ridge, showing that Birdperson continued to prioritize duty and family responsibility over personal adventure and freedom. The long-term impact of the rebellion extended to the broader galaxy as well. While the Resistance eventually collapsed as an organized force, The Federation itself proved vulnerable to internal economic manipulation. Rick later destroyed the Federation's economy by making their currency worthless, causing the entire organization to collapse into chaos. This demonstrated that even the most powerful authoritarian systems contain inherent weaknesses that can be exploited by those with sufficient knowledge and determination. The rebellion's legacy lived on through individual acts of resistance and the inspiration it provided to oppressed populations throughout the universe. Though Birdperson, Rick, and Squanchy never again fought together as a unified force, their example showed that tyranny could be challenged and even defeated by those willing to sacrifice personal comfort for the greater good. The story of the rebellion also highlighted the personal costs of fighting against overwhelming odds. While the freedom fighters achieved significant military victories, the psychological and emotional toll proved enormous. Rick's increasing nihilism, Birdperson's trauma-induced withdrawal from life, and the years of separation and mistrust between former allies demonstrated that even successful resistance movements exact a heavy price from those who lead them. Ultimately, the rebellion against the Galactic Federation represented both the potential for positive change and the tragic consequences of fighting against entrenched power. The bonds forged in combat proved both stronger and more fragile than any of the participants initially understood, creating relationships that could survive decades of separation but still fracture under the weight of divergent priorities and unhealed wounds. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have Unity and Rick's toxic romance, when love destroys civilizations. Unity stands as Rick Sanchez's most complex and emotionally significant romantic relationship in the Rick and Morty universe. Unity is a hive mind, and Rick Sanchez's former lover, who takes the forms of multiple races, sexes, and species, and uses both male and female avatars around Rick. Their relationship was a whirlwind of passion, chaos, and ultimately, self-destruction, with Unity serving as more than just a quirky sci-fi concept or fleeting romance for Rick. Unity's complex relationship with Rick exposes his deepest vulnerabilities and highlights the show's ability to blend science fiction with profound emotional depth, forcing viewers to question the nature of control, independence, and what it truly means to be in a relationship. Unity first appeared in the Season 2 episode Autoerotic Assimilation, where Rick, Morty, and Summer follow a distress signal from a seemingly abandoned alien starship, discovering that a group of Nepalians had been assimilated by Unity's hive mind consciousness. When the hive mind attacks and assimilates the remaining crew members, they recognize Rick, who awkwardly admits that he and Unity used to date. Unity explains their ability to take over entire populations, unifying worlds, and improving the quality of inhabitants' lives, though at the cost of their free will and individuality. Unity reveals their ambitious plans to manage an organization efficient enough to merge with the Galactic Federation, where they would have access to countless other worlds to assimilate until they become what the single-minded once called a god. Unity presents a fascinating paradox. They create order and harmony through assimilation, seemingly solving problems like crime and poverty. However, this comes at the cost of individual autonomy and cultural identity, forcing viewers to question whether genuine happiness can be achieved through forced conformity. Rick's alcoholism and self-destructive tendencies mirror Unity's struggle to maintain control over assimilated populations, hinting at a deeper connection rooted in shared flaws. Both characters represent different forms of control and domination, Rick through his toxic influence on those around him, and Unity through literal mind control of entire civilizations. Their relationship exists in a universe where the Galactic Federation seeks to impose order through bureaucratic oppression, making Unity's methods seem almost benevolent by comparison. The alien planet Unity controls showcases their capabilities perfectly. The world operates with unprecedented efficiency, featuring synchronized activities, eliminated crime, and perfect economic distribution. Citizens move in harmony, their individual conflicts dissolved into collective purpose. Yet underneath this utopian surface lies the fundamental question of whether progress achieved through the elimination of free will can ever be considered genuine improvement. Rick and Unity waste no time rekindling their relationship rather extravagantly upon reuniting. Unity demonstrates their power by creating elaborate displays for Rick's entertainment, including making an entire television show just for him with the command, "Now cancel it, now bring it back." The relationship quickly escalates into debauched partying involving drugs, alcohol, and group activities that showcase both Rick's hedonistic nature and Unity's willingness to indulge his every whim. During their reunion, a neighboring hive mind, called Beta 7, arrives on a routine trading mission. Beta 7, voiced by Patton Oswalt, represents another collective consciousness that has formed a practical alliance with Unity while harboring deeper romantic feelings. Beta 7's awkward attempts to pursue a closer relationship with Unity only cause Rick to mock the rival hive mind, demonstrating his possessive and competitive nature even in romantic situations. Rick notices that the materials Beta 7 left behind can be mixed into various drugs to enhance his and Unity's partying and sexual activities. This represents a turning point where their relationship becomes increasingly destructive, as Rick's influence pushes Unity toward more extreme behaviors. The creation and consumption of fractal dust, a powerful hallucinogenic substance, becomes central to their rekindled romance. As Rick and Unity indulge in their toxic reunion, Unity begins losing control over their assimilated citizens. The hive mind becomes so wrapped up in Rick's wants and needs, his whims and desires, that their attention to maintaining planetary control starts slipping. Citizens who have been unified under Unity's consciousness for potentially years begin showing signs of independent thought and action. Summer and Morty witness firsthand the consequences of Unity's relationship with Rick. Summer initially objects to Unity's control over the alien planet's population, seeing it as the unjust subjugation of an entire species. However, her perspective shifts dramatically when she observes what happens when Unity's control wavers. The moment some of the planet's population regains consciousness and free will, they immediately embark on a violent race war based on the shape of their nipples. Some have cone-shaped nipples, while others have ring-shaped nipples. This instant descent into tribal violence reveals the dark truth about the civilization Unity had absorbed. Before assimilation, these people were constantly at war or on the brink of conflict over biological differences. Unity's control had eliminated not just individual freedom, but also the prejudice, hatred, and violence that had defined their society. The race war demonstrates that Unity's methods, while ethically questionable, had genuinely created peace from chaos. The toxic dynamic between Rick and Unity reaches its peak during their drug-fueled bender. Unity has so much fun, reconnecting with Rick and performing increasingly dangerous stunts to impress him that they gradually lose control of their citizens across the entire planet. The hive mind consciousness becomes fractured as Unity's attention focuses entirely on satisfying Rick's desires rather than maintaining the delicate balance required to control millions of minds simultaneously. Rick's influence proves catastrophically destructive to Unity's core function. Just as he affects everyone in his family by making them compete for his attention and approval, Rick causes Unity to abandon their responsibilities as the guiding consciousness of an entire civilization. The entity that had successfully maintained perfect order and harmony for years begins experiencing system-wide failures due to Rick's toxic presence. The breaking point comes when Unity completely loses control during their most intense partying session. Citizens across the planet begin regaining their individual consciousness in waves, and the carefully maintained peace immediately collapses into chaos. The race war that erupts is swift and brutal, with former neighbors turning against each other based on the most superficial physical differences imaginable. Summer and Morty find themselves caught in the middle of this sudden violent uprising, being chased through the streets by angry mobs who have just regained the ability to hate after years or decades of forced unity. The contrast between the peaceful, synchronized world they had observed earlier and the immediate violence that erupts reveals the true complexity of Unity's moral position. A Unity-led SWAT team rescues Summer and Morty from the chaos, demonstrating that Unity retains enough control to protect Rick's family, even while losing grip on the broader population. However, this intervention comes at great cost, requiring Unity to divert significant resources from maintaining planetary stability to save two individuals who matter to Rick. The traumatic experience of witnessing an entire civilization collapse into race-based violence within minutes deeply affects both Summer and Morty. They insist that Rick take them home immediately, having seen the devastating consequences of both Unity's control and the alternative. Summer, despite initially opposing Unity's methods, now understands the horrible reality of what these people were like before assimilation. When Rick opens a portal to take his grandchildren home, he insists on staying behind with Unity. This decision reveals the depth of his emotional attachment to the hive mind, prioritizing his relationship over his family's trauma and fear. However, Summer confronts Rick about his unhealthy impact on Unity, expressing her disapproval of their relationship and pointing out that Rick brings out the worst in Unity, just as Unity enables Rick's most destructive tendencies. After Summer and Morty return to Earth, Rick remains with Unity for a while longer, attempting to continue their reunion despite the planetary chaos they have caused together. However, when Rick leaves to use the bathroom, he emerges to discover that Unity has completely deserted the city, and possibly the entire planet. In place of the hive mind's presence, Unity has written breakup letters across every available surface: walls, buildings, signs, and any space where text can be displayed. The breakup letters represent Unity's most vulnerable and honest communication with Rick. Rather than facing him directly, Unity chooses to end their relationship through written words, admitting they lack the strength to do it in person. The letters confess Unity's love for Rick, while simultaneously acknowledging the fundamental incompatibility that makes their relationship impossible. Unity's breakup message reveals the core problem with their relationship. I realize now that I'm attracted to you for the same reason I can't be with you. You can't change. And I have no problem with that, but it clearly means I have a problem with myself. This statement demonstrates remarkable self-awareness from the hive mind, recognizing that Rick's unchanging nature is both what attracts Unity and what makes him toxic to their existence. The letters continue with Unity explaining their realization about the destructive parallel between them. I lose who I am and become part of you. Because in a strange way, you're better at what I do, without even trying. Unity recognizes that Rick's ability to influence and control people through psychological manipulation rivals their own power of literal mind and control. But Rick achieves this influence without the responsibility or care that Unity maintains for their subjects. Unity's decision to leave demonstrates growth and maturity that Rick himself lacks. Despite their deep feelings for Rick, Unity chooses self-preservation and the welfare of the civilizations they protect over personal happiness. This decision highlights the fundamental difference between Rick's selfish approach to relationships and Unity's consideration of broader consequences. The aftermath extends beyond the personal relationship to affect the entire planet. Unity had been controlling. With the hive mind's sudden departure, the remaining population must now navigate their newfound freedom while dealing with the trauma of the race war and the collapsed infrastructure that had depended on Unity's coordination. The planet faces an uncertain future without the guiding consciousness that had maintained peace and prosperity. Rick returns home devastated by Unity's departure, facing the reality that even a cosmic entity capable of controlling entire planets found him too toxic to maintain a relationship with. The rejection cuts deeper than typical breakups because Unity understood Rick completely. They knew his flaws, his capabilities, and his potential for both creation and destruction, yet still chose to leave rather than continue enabling his worst behaviors. Upon returning to Earth, Rick faces confrontation from Beth about an alien prisoner he had been keeping in his basement laboratory. However, rather than his usual defensive or dismissive response, Rick simply concedes to Beth's demands and retreats to his garage. This unusual compliance suggests that Unity's rejection has fundamentally shaken Rick's confidence and his typical patterns of avoiding emotional consequences. In the garage, Rick begins assembling the components of a death ray while simultaneously unfreezing a deformed, distressed creature he had been storing in stasis. The creature appears to be suffering from some form of mutation or disease, screaming in apparent pain. Rick comforts the creature with surprising tenderness before vaporizing it with the completed death ray, showing mercy by ending its suffering. Rick then positions himself in front of the same death ray device, preparing to end his own life. The suicide attempt represents the culmination of his emotional breakdown following Unity's rejection. However, his alcoholism and emotional state cause him to pass out just before the machine can fully activate, inadvertently saving his life through the same self-destructive habits that created the crisis. The scene plays out to the song, "Do You Feel It?" by Chaos Chaos, creating one of the most emotionally powerful moments in the entire series. Rick's vulnerability and despair contrast sharply with his usual persona of detached scientific superiority, revealing the profound loneliness and pain beneath his cynical exterior. The post-credits scene shows Rick at Beta 7's mothership, desperately trying to contact Unity. Beta 7 informs Rick that he is classified as a hostile entity and threatens to attack unless Rick leaves immediately. This rejection from Unity's ally emphasizes Rick's complete isolation and the bridges he has burned through his toxic behavior. Years later, Unity makes another attempt to reconnect with Rick in the Season 7 episode, Air Force Wong. Unity takes over the entire state of Virginia after Rick ignores multiple voicemails where they express concern about Rick's renewed hunt for Rick Prime. This extreme action demonstrates that Unity still cares deeply for Rick, despite their previous breakup, and recognizes the self-destructive path he continues to follow. However, Rick's response to Unity's return reveals that he has not grown or learned from their previous relationship. He remains defensive, bitter, and unwilling to acknowledge Unity's genuine concern for his well-being. When Unity explains they came to Earth because they were worried about Rick's dangerous obsession with revenge, Rick rejects their care and pushes them away once again. The Virginia incident culminates with President Curtis attempting to use Unity's hive mind technology for his own political gain, seeking the 100% approval rating that Unity's controlled population displayed. This crisis forces Rick and Unity to work together temporarily, but Rick continues to maintain emotional distance, even when Unity demonstrates their continued care for him. Unity's final departure from Earth in Air Force Wong comes with a warning that they no longer trust Rick, having seen his continued unwillingness to change or accept help. Rick's discovery of Unity's worried voicemails reveals that the entire Virginia crisis could have been avoided if he had simply responded to their initial attempts at communication, highlighting how his emotional immaturity continues to create unnecessary conflicts. The long-term impact of Rick and Unity's relationship extends beyond their personal dynamic to influence Rick's approach to all relationships. Unity represents the only entity in the universe that truly understood Rick's nature while possessing the power to either challenge or complement his abilities. Their repeated rejections of him serve as a reality check that even cosmic-level beings find his behavior unacceptable. Rick's inability to maintain a relationship with Unity also reflects his broader struggle with emotional intimacy and change. Despite Unity's clear communication about what needs to change for their relationship to work, Rick remains fundamentally unable or unwilling to modify his behavior. This pattern repeats throughout his relationships with family members and other connections, suggesting that Unity's assessment of Rick as unchangeable may be tragically accurate. The relationship also highlights the philosophical questions about control, freedom, and the nature of love that run throughout Rick and Morty. Unity's method of loving through assimilation contrasts with Rick's method of loving through toxic influence, yet both approaches ultimately deny their subjects true autonomy. Their relationship represents a collision between two different forms of control that proves mutually destructive. Unity's continued concern for Rick, despite their incompatibility, demonstrates a form of unconditional love that Rick struggles to understand or reciprocate. Their willingness to risk planetary stability to check on Rick's well-being shows a depth of caring that Rick's cynical worldview cannot fully process, leading him to reject genuine affection in favor of maintaining his emotional defenses. The tragedy of Rick and Unity's relationship lies not in their fundamental incompatibility, but in Rick's refusal to grow or change despite having access to a love that spans galaxies. Unity offers Rick the possibility of a partnership between equals, but Rick's emotional limitations prevent him from accepting this gift, leaving him to face the universe alone through his own choices rather than circumstance. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the Microverse battery, slavery with extra steps. The Microverse battery represents one of Rick Sanchez's most morally questionable scientific achievements and serves as a perfect metaphor for systemic exploitation disguised as technological progress. The Microverse battery is a gadget developed by Rick to supply power to his flying ship, containing a miniature universe with a planet inhabited by intelligent life that unknowingly provides energy for Rick's convenience. Rick gave Google Box technology to an intelligent species to generate electricity, but unbeknownst to them, he takes a majority of the generated power, leading Morty to question Rick's ethics by calling it slavery with extra steps. This storyline exposes the cruel irony of how exploitation can be perpetuated at multiple levels, with each oppressor becoming oppressed in an endless cycle of cosmic servitude. The Microverse battery crisis begins when Rick, Morty, and Summer exit a theater after watching a Ball Fondlers movie in an alternate dimension. When Rick attempts to start his ship's engine, he discovers the car battery is completely dead, forcing him and Morty to travel inside the Microverse while Summer stays in the ship with instructions to keep Summer safe. Rick explains to Morty how he created the Microverse, using what he describes as putting a spatially tessellated void inside a modified temporal field until a planet developed intelligent life. This scientific achievement sounds impressive until Rick reveals its true purpose. He introduced electricity to the intelligent life forms that developed within his artificial universe, providing them with Googlebox technology, kinetic devices that the inhabitants use to generate power for their entire civilization. However, Rick extracts a majority of this generated energy to power his ship and charge his personal devices, all while the Microverse inhabitants remain completely unaware that they are being exploited. The inhabitants of Rick's Microverse consider him a benevolent alien deity who gave them the gift of electricity and advanced technology. They have even named a holiday after him called Rick's Giving and teach children about Rick in their schools. President Chris, the leader of the Microverse, treats Rick with reverence and gratitude, having no idea that Rick is essentially using their entire civilization as a cosmic battery. Rick's justification for this arrangement reveals his twisted worldview. When Morty objects that having a whole planet sitting around making your power for you constitutes slavery, Rick dismisses this concern by claiming it's simply society. He argues that the Microverse inhabitants work for each other, they pay each other, they buy houses, they get married and make children that replace them when they get too old to make power. Rick's rationalization demonstrates how systemic exploitation can be disguised as natural social order. The Microverse operates with temporal acceleration, meaning time passes faster inside Rick's artificial universe compared to the outside world. This allows entire generations of Microverse inhabitants to live and die while only hours pass for Rick, creating a disturbing dynamic where Rick witnesses countless lives dedicated to unknowingly serving his convenience. The inhabitants have built an entire culture and economy around the Googlebox technology, unaware that their foundational technology exists solely to power Rick's car. The crisis escalates when President Chris informs Rick and Morty that a scientist named Zeep Zanflorp has invented new technology that makes the Googleboxes obsolete. Zeep, voiced by Stephen Colbert, has created what he calls a miniverse, his own microscopic universe, designed to provide unlimited energy for his people. This development threatens to end the power flow to Rick's car battery, stranding him in the alternate dimension. Zeep Zanflorp represents a perfect parallel to Rick Sanchez, sharing many of his personality traits, including arrogance, intelligence, and a disregard for conventional education. Like Rick, Zeep dropped out of school because he believed it's not a place for smart people. He has created his miniverse using principles nearly identical to Rick's Microverse, establishing himself as a godlike figure to the inhabitants of his artificial universe, while extracting their energy for his own purposes. When Rick meets Zeep at the Zeep Tower, the scientist pretends not to remember Rick from previous encounters, which offends Rick's ego. This sets up an immediate rivalry between two cosmic-level narcissists who have both enslaved entire universes for personal convenience. Zeep introduces Rick and Morty to his miniverse with pride, showing them how he has created a perfect society powered by Flubla-Crank technology rather than Googleboxes. The miniverse represents an advancement over Rick's Microverse in terms of efficiency and sophistication. Zeep extracts 80% of the energy produced by his miniverse inhabitants, while Rick's extraction rate is less specific but described as taking some of it to power his ship. The temporal fields of both universes speed up time relative to the outside world, allowing entire civilizations to develop and evolve while their creators observe from outside. Rick immediately recognizes the threat Zeep's innovation poses to his own power source. If the Microverse inhabitants adopt miniverse technology instead of using Googleboxes, Rick's car battery will become permanently defunct. However, Rick also sees an opportunity to turn Zeep's own logic against him by finding someone within the miniverse who might be working on even smaller universe technology. After being persuaded by President Chris, Zeep allows Rick and Morty to enter his miniverse to see his creation firsthand. The miniverse operates on principles nearly identical to the Microverse, with inhabitants who worship Zeep as a benevolent alien deity while unknowingly providing energy for his world. The architectural design of the miniverse bears resemblance to Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water, suggesting an aesthetic sophistication that Rick's more utilitarian Microverse lacks. Inside Zeep's miniverse, Rick implements his strategy to expose the hypocrisy of the entire system by seeking out scientists working on similar projects. When Rick asks about researchers developing Microverse-like technology, they are introduced to Kyle, a scientist voiced by Nathan Fielder, who has been working on his own Teenyverse project. Kyle represents the next level in this recursive cycle of exploitation, having created an even smaller universe to power his miniverse civilization. Kyle's Teenyverse represents the most primitive stage of this technology, not yet advanced enough to support complex societies capable of generating electricity. The planet Kyle has created contains only basic life forms that have not yet developed the intelligence necessary to build power-generating infrastructure. However, Kyle explains that with time acceleration, his Teenyverse will eventually evolve creatures capable of using Blue-Yank technology to generate power. When Zeep observes Kyle's project, he begins making the same moral objections to the Teenyverse that Rick had made about the Miniverse. Zeep criticizes Kyle for creating what he calls an immoral system of exploitation, arguing that enslaving entire universes for power generation crosses ethical boundaries. However, as Zeep delivers this lecture, he experiences a moment of horrifying self-awareness, realizing that his arguments against Kyle's Teenyverse apply equally to his own miniverse. This realization leads Zeep to confront Rick about the true nature of their relationship. Zeep asks directly whether Rick created his universe, whether his entire reality is merely a miniverse within Rick's microverse. When Rick confirms this truth, Zeep attacks him in a rage that reflects both his humiliation at being deceived and his anger at discovering his own hypocrisy. Kyle witnesses this confrontation and begins processing the full implications of his situation. He realizes that Rick created Zeep's universe, Zeep created Kyle's universe, and Kyle was working to create another universe in an endless chain of exploitation. This revelation devastates Kyle as he remembers missing his father's funeral because he was too absorbed in his universe creation project, sacrificing personal relationships for scientific achievement that ultimately serves only to perpetuate cosmic slavery. Unable to cope with the existential horror of his situation, Kyle commits suicide by flying his spaceship directly into a cliff formation. His death strands Rick, Morty, and Zeep in the Teenyverse, forcing them to survive in a primitive world while dealing with the consequences of their recursive exploitation system. Kyle's suicide represents the ultimate cost of this scientific hubris. See once. The complete breakdown of individuals who discover their entire existence serves only to power the conveniences of higher dimensional beings. Stranded in Kyle's Teenyverse after his suicide, Rick, Morty, and Zeep face survival in a primitive world inhabited by tree people and various dangerous creatures. The three survivors split into separate groups, with Rick and Morty living in one cave-like dwelling, while Zeep isolates himself in another. The forced cohabitation in this alien environment brings out the worst competitive instincts in both Rick and Zeep, who refuse to cooperate despite their shared predicament. Morty attempts to mediate between Rick and Zeep, suggesting they work together to find a way back to Zeep's miniverse. However, both scientists reject cooperation, preferring to pursue individual solutions that allow them to maintain their ego and superiority over the other. This stubborn refusal to collaborate extends their imprisonment in the Teenyverse for months, during which time both Rick and Zeep develop increasingly sophisticated technology for their ongoing conflict. The extended stay in the Teenyverse transforms their rivalry into an elaborate technological arms race. Both scientists construct advanced mechanical suits and weapons using materials available in Kyle's primitive universe, engaging in battles that mirror their philosophical disagreement about the ethics of universe creation. Their conflict escalates to the point where they pilot wooden mech-like suits in combat, each trying to prove superiority over the other while remaining trapped in the consequences of their shared exploitation system. Frustrated by Rick and Zeep's childish behavior and their refusal to prioritize escape over ego satisfaction, Morty eventually abandons both scientists to live with the indigenous tree people. This decision reflects Morty's growing maturity and his rejection of the toxic competitive dynamic that has consumed Rick and Zeep. Morty's departure forces him to adapt to an alien culture, while the two scientists continue their pointless battle. During his time with the tree people, Morty somehow becomes their leader, though he disputes this characterization and insists they have no formal hierarchy. The tree people appear to possess wisdom about the futility of Rick and Zeep's conflict, understanding that their competition serves no productive purpose. However, Morty discovers that the tree people's apparent enlightenment masks their own savage practices, including eating every third baby to make fruit grow bigger. After months of watching Rick and Zeep's equally matched battles destroy their respective mechanical suits, the tree people surround the combatants with Morty as their spokesperson. Morty guides the two rivals to Koala, the spirit tree, attempting to use the tree people's apparent wisdom to broker peace between the scientists. However, Morty reveals to Rick that he has been driven near madness by the tree people's vile and unsanitary behavior, finding them to be savage cannibals, despite their superficial appearance of wisdom. The resolution of the Teenyverse crisis comes when Morty forces Rick and Zeep to cooperate by threatening to leave them permanently stranded among the tree people. Faced with the prospect of eternal imprisonment in Kyle's universe, both scientists finally agree to work together to create technology capable of returning them to the miniverse. Their collaboration proves successful, allowing all three to escape the Teenyverse and return to Zeep's world. However, the temporary cooperation immediately breaks down once they reach safety. Zeep attempts to kill Rick and Morty, viewing their knowledge of his universe's true nature as an existential threat to his godlike status among his people. This betrayal triggers a final confrontation where Rick destroys Zeep's miniverse entirely, simultaneously eliminating Kyle's Teenyverse and countless billions of lives across both artificial universes. Rick's destruction of the miniverse and Teenyverse represents one of his most genocidal acts, wiping out entire civilizations to maintain his power source and defeat his rival. The casual ease with which Rick commits this cosmic-scale mass murder demonstrates the complete dehumanization that results from treating sentient beings as expendable resources. Rick shows no remorse for destroying Kyle's universe or the civilization Zeep had created, viewing them purely as obstacles to his convenience. After a final physical brawl, Rick defeats Zeep and forces him to accept a terrible choice. Zeep must either return his people to using Google Box technology to power Rick's battery, or Rick will simply discard the entire Microverse battery and destroy Zeep's universe completely. This sadistic choice forces Zeep to become a willing participant in the exploitation of his own people, knowing that resistance means total annihilation for everyone he has ever known. Rick's victory establishes a permanent power dynamic, where Zeep must maintain the Google Box infrastructure to keep his universe alive, effectively making him complicit in the enslavement of his own civilization. Zeep realizes he must stop his experimentation with miniverse technology and return his people to their original power generation methods, sacrificing scientific progress to preserve their existence under Rick's tyrannical control. The Microverse crisis reveals the recursive nature of exploitation systems, where each oppressor becomes oppressed in turn. Rick exploits the Microverse, Zeep exploits the Miniverse, Kyle was developing the Teenyverse, and presumably the cycle would continue indefinitely if not interrupted by Kyle's suicide. This pattern demonstrates how power structures perpetuate themselves by creating new levels of victims and victimizers. The aftermath also exposes Rick's complete lack of moral growth, despite witnessing the devastating consequences of his actions. When Rick and Morty return to their universe, Rick admits that Morty was right about being honest from the start, suggesting he understands the ethical problems with deception. However, this acknowledgement comes only after Rick has already achieved his goals and destroyed multiple universes, making his supposed lesson meaningless. The Microverse battery continues operating after these events, meaning billions of sentient beings remain enslaved to power Rick's car while believing they are living free lives in service to a benevolent deity. The inhabitants celebrate Rick's giving and teach their children about Rick's gifts, perpetuating the mythology that disguises their exploitation. Each generation grows up accepting Google Box labor as natural and necessary, never questioning the system that consumes their lives. Rick's treatment of the Microverse inhabitants as expendable resources reflects real-world patterns of exploitation, where those in power extract value from vulnerable populations while maintaining plausible deniability about the harm they cause. The slavery with extra steps concept illuminates how complex systems can obscure fundamental injustices, making exploitation seem like natural economic or social order rather than deliberate oppression. The story's resolution offers no justice for the victims or consequences for Rick's actions. The Microverse inhabitants remain enslaved. Zeep is forced into collaboration with his oppressor, and Kyle's universe has been completely destroyed, along with any hope of ending the exploitation cycle. Rick faces no accountability for genocide and continues using the Microverse battery as if nothing significant has occurred. This outcome reflects Rick and Morty's consistently dark worldview, where cosmic-scale injustices persist without resolution, and the powerful face no meaningful consequences for their actions. The Microverse battery represents the ultimate expression of Rick's nihilistic philosophy, where entire civilizations exist solely to serve his convenience, and their suffering is irrelevant to his moral calculations. The long-term implications extend beyond the immediate story to illuminate how technological advancement can perpetuate rather than eliminate exploitation. Rick's scientific genius enables greater efficiency and oppression, creating more sophisticated systems for extracting value from vulnerable populations while maintaining the pretense of beneficial progress. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have portal gun technology, the science behind interdimensional travel. The portal gun stands as Rick Sanchez's greatest scientific achievement and the foundation of all interdimensional travel in the Rick and Morty universe. The portal gun is a gadget that allows users to travel between different dimensions and locations within one dimension, first created by Rick Prime, who began visiting his alternate selves and gifting them the technology. When Rick Prime came to Dimension C-137, his counterpart rejected the offer, leading Prime to send a bomb that killed Rick C-137's wife Diane and daughter Beth. After grieving, Rick C-137 built his own portal gun, becoming the only Rick other than Prime to actually invent the device rather than receive it as a gift. This technology represents the ultimate expression of scientific power and the key to understanding the multiverse itself. The portal gun technology operates on principles that bend the fundamental laws of physics and reality. Rick describes creating a spatially tessellated void inside a modified temporal field to enable interdimensional travel, though the exact mechanics remain deliberately mysterious. The device resembles a television remote or small handheld vacuum, featuring a sleek design small enough for Rick to carry inside his coat. The portal gun's most notable features include a small display screen that shows various information and the glowing green substance that extends from the top of the device. The portal gun utilizes a special fluid that Rick calls quantum transport solution in later episodes. Portal fluid is made from rare, green glowing crystals that Rick buys illegally, suggesting the technology requires materials not readily available through legal channels. The glass chamber at the top functions as a fuel tank, and the gun can run out of charge when this special liquid is depleted. The portal fluid spills in an unpaired state act as massless negative voids of variable depth, creating pocket dimensions that can store objects indefinitely. Portal gun technology has limitations that prevent unlimited power. Only mass heavier than air may pass through the portals, creating restrictions on what can be transported. The device keeps a history of locations it has teleported to and from recently, allowing for tracking by authorities like the Council of Ricks. The gun can also create a self-imploding portal that drags everything nearby into it during emergencies, activated by a hidden button in the handle. The technology enables travel between different places within the same universe, as well as travel to anywhere within other dimensions and realities. Rick can open a portal from Earth in one dimension that takes travelers to Mars in a completely different dimension, demonstrating the gun's versatility. Purple portals allow movement between 2 points within a dimension, while green portals signify interdimensional travel between completely separate universes. The portal gun can interface with computers through the muzzle and appears to be telepathically controlled by authorized cybernetically augmented users who can adjust portal coordinates with ease. Advanced versions can open multiple portals of varying sizes at once, and the device can be used offensively or defensively by transporting hazards to different locations or creating obstacles for enemies. The tragic backstory behind portal gun technology reveals the destructive nature of interdimensional travel capabilities. Originally, Rick Prime created the portal gun and sought to share the dimension-hopping device with other versions of himself across space and time. While many versions of Rick accepted the technology and knowledge required to understand and wield the device, Rick C-137 refused the offer because he was content with his happy home life with his wife and daughter. Rick Prime became enraged by Rick C-137's lack of enthusiasm for interdimensional travel and rejection of the technology. Insulted by this refusal, Prime sent a bomb to Rick C-137's dimension, specifically targeting his family to punish him for not accepting the gift of portal travel. The bomb killed Rick C-137's wife Diane and daughter Beth, destroying his peaceful life and forcing him into the multiverse he had originally wanted to avoid. After grieving from this trauma, Rick C. 137 pulled himself together and jury-rigged a much smaller prototype portal gun, making him the only Rick other than Prime to actually invent the device rather than simply receive it. This newly constructed version became capable of interdimensional travel, which Rick used to begin hunting for Rick Prime across countless dimensions. Over several years, gradual improvements were made to this unique portal gun, eventually culminating in the modern iteration typically shown throughout Rick and Morty's adventures. The earliest observed instance of portal gun development appears in a memory extracted by Federation agent Cornelius Daniel, showing Rick Cone 137 inches his home dimension tinkering with the concept of teleportation. The memory reveals a bulky handheld prototype device that was clearly struggling with the complexities of practical interspatial teleportation, with Rick having obvious difficulty getting it fully operational. This primitive version demonstrates how portal technology evolved from crude beginnings to the sophisticated devices seen in the series. Rick's hunt for Rick Prime led him to travel throughout what would later be revealed as the Central Finite Curve, a carefully constructed subset of the infinite multiverse. During this search, Rick encountered other versions of himself, and gradually became involved in the formation of the Council of Ricks and the Citadel. His unique status as someone who invented portal technology rather than received it gave him special standing among the Ricks, though he eventually grew tired of their bureaucratic approach to multiverse management. The portal gun technology becomes central to the most significant events in Rick and Morty lore through its connection to the Central Finite Curve. The Central Finite Curve represents a defined portion of the multiverse where most, if not all, Ricks in the series reside. This curve was designed by the precursors of what would later become the Council of Ricks and Rick C. 137 to wall off the infinite number of universes in which Rick is the smartest person alive from the rest of the infinite multiverse. Using advanced variations of portal gun technology, the Ricks built a massive machine underneath the Citadel, designed to lock out travel to or from any universe within the multiverse, where Rick himself was not the dominant life form or smartest being alive. This includes universes where Jerry might be the smartest being, or where Rick Sanchez doesn't exist at all. The Central Finite Curve essentially created a closed-off multiverse that only contains universes in which Rick exists and thrives. The creation of the Central Finite Curve had profound implications for portal gun technology. All standard portal guns used by Ricks could only access dimensions within the curve, meaning every Rick was guaranteed to be the smartest being in every reality he could visit. This artificial limitation perpetuated the myth among Mortys, their families, and alien races they encountered, that Rick was truly the top of the food chain across all reality. Portal fluid becomes restricted on the Citadel of Ricks, leading to the rise of bootleg portal fluid production. When bootleg portal fluid is made correctly, it acts the same way as genuine portal fluid. However, when made incorrectly, by messing up the complex mathematical formulas involved, it can have disastrous effects. Ricks attempting to use improperly made bootleg portal fluid can dissolve upon contact with the portals they create, likely killing them instantly. The portal gun technology faces its greatest test when evil Morty discovers the existence of the Central Finite Curve and seeks to break free from its constraints. Through a prolonged strategy involving his election as president of the Citadel, evil Morty captures Rick C. 137 and scans his brain for the schematics of the Citadel's dimensional drive. This technology represents an advanced application of portal gun principles on a massive scale. Evil Morty's plan involves overcharging the dimensional drive and using it to punch a hole in the Central Finite Curve itself. He activates his dimensional drive protocol, powering it with the blood of Operation Phoenix clones to create an opening in the barrier that had contained all Ricks for decades. The Citadel begins breaking apart as evil Morty executes his escape plan, demonstrating the devastating power that portal technology can unleash when used aggressively. Evil Morty's successful breach of the Central Finite Curve has immediate and devastating consequences for portal gun technology throughout the multiverse. As Evil Morty flies through the opening he created, he uses his own portal gun filled with unique golden fluid rather than the standard green portal fluid used by all Ricks. This golden portal gun represents a technological advancement that allows travel to universes outside the Central Finite Curve for the first time. The destruction of the Central Finite Curve renders Rick's portal gun and all standard portal travel systems useless. Since Rick's portal gun technology was specifically designed to operate within the confines of the curve, breaking that barrier disrupts the fundamental principles on which the technology operates. Rick's portal gun becomes completely non-functional, stranding him and Morty without their primary means of interdimensional travel. The breach creates several rifts in the multiverse that persist long after evil Morty's escape. These rifts represent tears in the fabric of reality itself, caused by the violent destruction of the dimensional barriers that had separated the central finite curve from the rest of the infinite multiverse. The rifts pose ongoing dangers, allowing unpredictable interdimensional phenomena to occur and threatening the stability of reality itself. Rick attempts to fix the portal traveling system in the aftermath, but initially fails spectacularly. His efforts to restore portal gun functionality result in unintended consequences, including returning all variants to their dimensions of origin. This includes the dangerous Rick Prime, whose return to his native dimension creates new threats for Rick C-137. The failure of Rick's repair attempts demonstrates how thoroughly evil Morty's actions disrupted the fundamental technology. The golden portal fluid used in evil Morty's portal gun suggests the existence of alternative portal technologies that operate outside the constraints of the central finite curve. While green portals could only access universes where Rick was the dominant being, yellow portals can reach all other realities, including those where Rick is not the smartest person, not the most dominant, or where he may not even exist. This represents a complete paradigm shift in portal technology capabilities. Evil Morty's portal gun potentially allows access to the entirety of the multiverse that was previously prohibited, giving it a far greater theoretical range than any other teleportation device observed in the series. His escape to universes beyond the central finite curve opens up infinite possibilities for exploration of realities that Ricks had deliberately avoided or been unable to reach. The destruction of the central finite curve fundamentally changes how portal gun technology operates and what it can accomplish. Rick's portal gun remains largely non-functional for an extended period, forcing him to find alternative solutions to problems he would normally solve through interdimensional travel. This technological limitation affects not only Rick's adventures, but also his relationship with his family, as they can no longer easily escape dangerous situations by hopping to alternate dimensions. The mysterious rift in the multiverse persists for months, serving as a constant reminder of the disruption evil Morty caused to reality itself. Rick appears reluctant to fix this remaining rift completely, possibly because he fears the consequences of fully restoring portal travel capabilities. The rift represents both a vulnerability in reality and a potential escape route that Rick may want to preserve for emergencies. The development of alternative portal technologies becomes crucial for restoring interdimensional travel capabilities. The dinosaurs, an advanced alien civilization, eventually developed technology capable of fixing the rift in the multiverse. Their portal technology features see-through portals that allow users to observe their destination before entering, representing an advancement over Rick's traditional portal guns that open blind portals to unknown destinations. Rick eventually manages to repair and improve his portal gun technology by incorporating lessons learned from the central finite curve's destruction. The restored portal gun appears to have enhanced capabilities, allowing Rick and Morty to resume their classic dimension-hopping adventures. However, the fundamental nature of portal travel has changed, as the barriers that once limited Rick's access to certain universes no longer exist. The implications of evil Morty's actions extend far beyond simple technological disruption. By breaking the central finite curve, he exposed the artificial nature of Rick's apparent dominance across the multiverse. Portal gun technology had been used to maintain a carefully curated reality where Rick always appeared to be the smartest being, but now the infinite universes where this is not true become accessible for the first time. The long-term consequences include the potential for encounters with beings more intelligent than Rick, realities where different physical laws apply, and universes where the fundamental assumptions about science and technology may not hold true. Portal gun technology must adapt to handle these new realities that operate under completely different rules than those within the central finite curve. The existence of multiple portal gun technologies with different capabilities becomes evident through evil Morty's golden portal gun and the dinosaurs' advanced portal devices. This suggests that portal travel technology will continue evolving and diversifying, with different civilizations and individuals developing their own approaches to interdimensional travel based on their specific needs and capabilities. Rick's relationship with portal technology becomes more complex, as he confronts the reality that his scientific achievements were built within an artificially limited framework. The portal gun that once represented ultimate freedom and power is revealed to have been operating within constraints designed to protect Rick's ego and maintain his sense of superiority. The broader implications for the Rick and Morty universe include the possibility of contact with civilizations and individuals from outside the central finite curve who may possess portal technologies or other scientific capabilities that surpass anything the Ricks ever developed. This opens up storylines involving cosmic entities, alternate forms of science, and realities where the fundamental nature of existence operates according to completely different principles. Portal gun technology transforms from a tool of Rick's dominance into a symbol of the limitations he had unknowingly accepted. The future of interdimensional travel in the Rick and Morty universe depends on developing new approaches that can handle the infinite complexity of the unrestricted multiverse, while avoiding the mistakes that led to the creation of the central finite curve in the first place. The legacy of portal gun technology includes both its revolutionary impact on interdimensional travel and its role in perpetuating a false reality that limited the potential for true scientific discovery. As Rick and other characters adapt to the post-curve multiverse, portal technology must evolve to meet challenges that were previously unimaginable within the comfortable confines of Rick-dominated realities. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have Tammy's betrayal, the wedding that changed everything. Tammy's betrayal at her wedding to Birdperson represents the most devastating personal attack Rick Sanchez has ever experienced, and marks the single event that changed everything for the Smith family and the entire Rick and Morty universe. Tammy Guterman was a deep cover agent for the Galactic Federation who posed as a student at Harry Herpson High School and a close friend of Summer Smith, but was engaged to Birdperson and planned their wedding as a trap to gather as many enemies of the Galactic Federation in one location to capture and arrest them. During the wedding reception, Tammy reveals herself to be an agent of the Galactic Federation, shoots Birdperson multiple times with a laser rifle, and has numerous Federation agents attack the wedding guests. This betrayal destroys Rick's closest friendship, leads to his imprisonment, and results in Earth joining the Galactic Federation as its 6,048th planet. Tammy Guterman first appeared as a background character in Season 1, making brief appearances as one of Summer's friends at Harry Herpson High School. She seemed like a typical teenager with a craving to be popular at school, appearing flirty and sarcastic, while dealing with typical high school problems, like not having a boyfriend. However, everything about Tammy's identity was carefully constructed as part of an elaborate undercover operation by the Galactic Federation. The Galactic Federation had been actively hunting Rick Sanchez, Birdperson, and Squanchy for years, considering them dangerous terrorists who had committed crimes against the Federation's authority. Rick, Birdperson, and Squanchy were once freedom fighters against the Galactic Federation's oppression, with their resistance activities earning them warrants for their arrests and placement on the Federation's most wanted list. The three had fought together in conflicts like the Battle of Blood Ridge, and had formed deep bonds through their shared rebellion against tyrannical authority. Tammy's assignment involved infiltrating Rick's social circle through his family connections, specifically targeting Summer as a way to get close to Rick's associates. As a student at the same high school as Summer, Tammy could easily maintain her cover while gathering intelligence about Rick's activities and relationships. The Federation understood that Rick's few genuine friendships represented his greatest vulnerability, making his friends the perfect targets for manipulation. The relationship between Tammy and Birdperson began during Rick's house party in the Season 1 finale, Ricksy Business. At this party, Birdperson was looking for a new romantic partner after ending his previous soul bond, and Tammy approached him, despite his initial reluctance. She whispered something into his ear that convinced him to take her home, beginning what appeared to be a genuine romantic relationship between a teenage human and an ancient bird-like humanoid. Over the course of their relationship, Tammy lived with Birdperson on his home planet, appearing comfortable in his alien environment and seeming to develop genuine feelings for him. She was present during significant moments, including when Rick and Morty visited Birdperson's home and appeared to be building a life with him. The relationship progressed naturally from Tammy's perspective as a Federation agent, allowing her to gather detailed intelligence about Birdperson's past, his connections to other wanted criminals, and his relationship with Rick. The wedding invitation itself was delivered through an intergalactic courier service called a courier flap, resembling the interdimensional version of a delivery service. The invitation came as a metallic, egg-shaped item that, when cracked open, projected a holographic message featuring both Tammy and Birdperson announcing their mate-melding ceremony on planet Squanch. The cheerful, innocent presentation of the invitation gave no hint of the trap being set for Rick and his associates. Rick's immediate reaction to the wedding invitation revealed his deep discomfort with the concept of marriage and commitment. He dismissed the invitation with his characteristic cynicism, declaring that weddings are basically funerals with cake, and expressing his belief that marriage represented people throwing their lives away. Rick's hostility toward the wedding went beyond his general cynicism about relationships, suggesting an underlying understanding that something about the situation felt wrong. Despite Rick's objections, circumstances forced the entire Smith family to attend the wedding when Jerry was accidentally transported to planet Squanch by the courier service. This mishap meant that Rick had no choice but to retrieve Jerry, bringing the whole family along to what would become a carefully orchestrated trap. The Federation's plan relied on Rick's loyalty to his family, knowing that he would never abandon Jerry even if he suspected danger. The wedding ceremony took place on planet Squanch, Squanchy's homeworld, with the cat-like alien serving as host for his friend's celebration. The guest list included numerous criminals wanted by the Galactic Federation, creating the perfect opportunity for a mass arrest operation. Rick's criminal associates attended because they trusted Birdperson and wanted to celebrate his happiness, unaware that they were walking into an ambush. During the wedding festivities, the Smith family mingled with the alien guests, while Rick remained characteristically aloof and suspicious. Jerry tried unsuccessfully to joke with Tammy's supposed parents, Pat and Donna Guterman, who seemed oddly accepting of their teenage daughter marrying a much older alien. Beth spoke with Birdperson about Rick's past, learning more about their friendship and shared history as freedom fighters. Meanwhile, Rick drowned his discomfort in alcohol, trying to process his unease about the entire situation. The ceremony itself proceeded without incident, with Birdperson and Tammy exchanging vows in front of their assembled guests. Tammy wore a traditional white wedding dress with flowers and used a pine cone as her wedding ring from Birdperson, maintaining the appearance of a genuine romantic union. The celebration seemed authentic, with guests enjoying themselves and participating in what appeared to be a joyous occasion, celebrating the union of two beings from different worlds. Following Morty's advice to be more open and supportive, Rick reluctantly agreed to give a wedding toast during the reception. His speech represented a rare moment of vulnerability where Rick admitted his cynicism about marriage while simultaneously expressing his love for his best friend. Rick's toast acknowledged his own failures in relationships while declaring that his friendship with Birdperson was strong enough to overcome his doubts about love and commitment. Tammy's betrayal began during her own wedding reception speech, immediately following Rick's heartfelt toast about friendship and love. Standing before the assembled guests in her wedding dress, Tammy delivered what initially seemed like a typical bride's speech, expressing apparent surprise at her own situation as a high school senior from Earth marrying an alien. However, her tone quickly shifted as she revealed the devastating truth about her identity and intentions. I look around this room, and I think, Tammy, you're a high school senior from the planet Earth, and you're marrying a 40-year-old Birdperson? Like what? Tammy began, maintaining the facade of an overwhelmed teenager. Summer responded supportively, believing her friend was simply nervous about her unusual relationship. However, Tammy's next words shattered every assumption about her identity and motivations. But then, I think, in a lot of ways, I'm not a high school senior from the planet Earth, Tammy continued, her voice becoming cold and authoritative. In a lot of ways, what I really am is a deep cover agent for the Galactic Federation, and you guys are a group of wanted criminals. And this entire building is, in a certain sense, surrounded. The revelation hit the wedding guests like a physical blow, transforming celebration into terror in mere seconds. Rick's immediate reaction was a simple, shocked, "Oh shit," as the full scope of the trap became clear. Beth, confused by the metaphorical language, asked for clarification while Jerry promised to explain later, neither fully grasping the immediate danger they faced. The wedding guests looked around in confusion and growing panic as the implications of Tammy's words sank in. Tammy then produced a laser rifle from seemingly nowhere, pointing it at the assembled guests while declaring, "Everyone here is under arrest for crimes against the Federation." The transformation from blushing bride to armed federal agent was complete and terrifying, revealing the depth of the deception that had been maintained for months or possibly years. Birdperson, confused and heartbroken by his bride's sudden transformation, stood up and asked, "Tammy, what are you doing?" His voice carried the pain of complete betrayal, unable to comprehend how the woman he loved could suddenly become his enemy. The genuine confusion and hurt in Birdperson's reaction highlighted the emotional devastation of Tammy's deception. Tammy's response was swift and merciless. Pointing her weapon directly at Birdperson, she commanded, "Sit your bird ass down." When Birdperson remained standing, still trying to process what was happening, Tammy shot him multiple times in the torso with her laser rifle. The shots were deliberate and brutal, designed to kill rather than incapacitate, demonstrating that her mission took priority over any feelings she might have developed during their relationship. Rick's anguished scream of "Birdperson" echoed through the reception hall as his best friend collapsed, mortally wounded by the woman who had claimed to love him. The shooting triggered immediate chaos as Federation agents who had been hidden around the building burst in to arrest the wanted criminals, turning the wedding reception into a battlefield. The wedding reception erupted into a violent firefight as hidden Galactic Federation agents emerged from their positions around the building to engage the wanted criminals. Rick immediately drew his weapon and began exchanging fire with Tammy and the Federation forces, while other guests either fled in panic or joined the battle. The joyous celebration transformed into a massacre within seconds, with bodies falling throughout the reception hall. During the chaos, Tammy's supposed parents, Pat and Donna Guterman, revealed themselves to be cyborgs, working as part of her cover operation. They pursued Beth and Jerry, attempting to capture or kill them as accessories to Rick's crimes. However, the robotic parents proved incompetent in combat, falling off the back of the Smith family's escape vehicle while it was in midair, presumably destroying them both. Squanchy provided the crucial diversion that allowed the Smith family to escape the massacre. The cat-like alien pulled out one of his own teeth and consumed a substance that transformed him into a massive berserker warrior, growing to enormous size and gaining incredible strength. In his transformed state, Squanchy fought off the surviving Federation forces, avenging many of his fallen allies and buying time for Rick and his family to flee the planet. Rick attempted to use his portal gun to escape, but Tammy ambushed him and held him at gunpoint, demanding that he surrender the device. Rick complied with her demand, but rigged the portal gun to explode, killing several Federation officers and temporarily blinding and deafening Tammy with the blast. This prevented the Federation from capturing his portal gun technology while providing additional cover for his family's escape. The explosion rendered Rick's portal gun unusable, stranding the family without their primary means of interdimensional travel. They were forced to search for alternative planets where they could hide from Federation pursuit, eventually settling on a tiny planet with Earth-like conditions but at a fraction of the normal size. The miniature world allowed them to walk its entire circumference in just a few minutes, creating a claustrophobic prison where they faced an uncertain future. As news of the wedding massacre spread, the Galactic Federation used the incident to justify their complete takeover of Earth. They declared that Earth had joined the Federation as its 6,048th planet, essentially conquering the planet without resistance from its unprepared governments. Federation forces landed worldwide, establishing checkpoints and beginning the process of integrating Earth into their bureaucratic system. The Federation's immediate response demonstrated their efficiency in exploiting the chaos Rick's presence had created. They presented Earth's integration as a voluntary joining rather than an invasion, using propaganda to suggest that Federation membership would bring benefits like advanced technology and universal healthcare, while downplaying the loss of freedom and autonomy that accompanied their rule. The wedding massacre fundamentally altered the relationship between Rick and his family, forcing them all to confront the real consequences of Rick's criminal activities. While the Smith family had previously been somewhat isolated from the dangers Rick faced, Tammy's betrayal made them direct targets of the Galactic Federation, ending their ability to maintain normal lives. The family was forced to live as fugitives on an alien world, completely cut off from their previous existence on Earth. Rick's psychological response to Birdperson's apparent death revealed the depth of his emotional attachment to his few genuine friendships. The loss of his best friend to such a calculated betrayal reinforced Rick's cynical worldview about trust and relationships, providing fresh evidence that emotional connections inevitably lead to pain and disappointment. Rick's grief over Birdperson's death became one of the few times in the series where his emotional walls completely crumbled. The isolation on the tiny planet created intense pressure within the Smith family as they struggled to survive without Rick's usual technological solutions. Jerry, in particular, began advocating for the family to return to Earth and turn Rick into the Federation, arguing that Rick's selfishness had brought this fate upon them. However, Beth, Summer, and Morty defended Rick, expressing their unconditional love for him as a family member, despite the danger he had brought into their lives. Rick overheard the family's discussions about potentially turning him in, including Jerry's arguments about his selfishness and the others' declarations of loyalty. This conversation became the catalyst for Rick's ultimate decision to sacrifice himself for his family's safety. Rather than forcing them to choose between their love for him and their desire for a normal life, Rick chose to remove himself from the equation entirely. Rick's surrender to the Galactic Federation represented one of his few genuinely selfless acts in the series. He contacted the Federation while pretending to be Jerry, agreeing to turn himself in exchange for his family's freedom and safe return to Earth. This decision demonstrated that despite his cynical exterior, Rick was capable of putting his family's welfare above his own freedom and safety. The Federation honored their agreement with Rick, returning the Smith family to Earth and providing them with new lives under Federation rule. Jerry finally received a job assignment from the Ministry of Employment, ending his long period of unemployment but placing him under the direct control of alien authorities. The family's return to Earth came with the understanding that they were now citizens of the Galactic Federation rather than free humans. Rick's imprisonment on a maximum security prison planet represented the Federation's ultimate victory over their most wanted criminal. Charged with everything, Rick faced what appeared to be indefinite incarceration under the harshest conditions the Federation could impose. His capture provided the Federation with opportunities to study his technology and potentially extract information about other criminals and rebel activities. Earth's integration into the Galactic Federation brought massive changes to human civilization. Alien tourists began visiting the planet to observe human culture, while Federation bureaucrats established new governmental systems that prioritized order and compliance over human freedom. The transformation of Earth from an independent world to a Federation protectorate fundamentally altered the setting of the Rick and Morty universe. Tammy's mission proved successful beyond the Federation's expectations, not only capturing Rick Sanchez, but also eliminating Birdperson and Squanchy while bringing an entire planet under Federation control. Her success demonstrated the effectiveness of long-term undercover operations in defeating even the most dangerous enemies of Federation authority. However, the Federation also suffered significant losses during the wedding massacre, with many agents killed in the firefight and the destruction of Rick's portal gun preventing them from acquiring his advanced technology. The operation's success came at a substantial cost in personnel and resources, though the strategic gains of capturing Rick and controlling Earth made these losses acceptable to Federation leadership. The betrayal's psychological impact extended beyond Rick to affect the entire Smith family's understanding of trust and relationships. Summer lost one of her few close friends and learned that their entire friendship had been a lie designed to exploit her family. The revelation that someone she trusted could maintain such an elaborate deception for so long damaged Summer's ability to form new relationships and trust new people. Birdperson's apparent death eliminated one of the few stabilizing influences in Rick's life, removing a friend who could provide emotional support and moral guidance during Rick's darkest moments. The loss of this relationship left Rick more isolated than ever, with fewer connections to prevent him from pursuing increasingly destructive and reckless behavior. The wedding massacre became a defining moment in the Rick and Morty universe, establishing the Galactic Federation as a legitimate threat capable of matching Rick's intelligence and resources. Tammy's successful infiltration proved that Rick's enemies could be just as cunning and patient as he was, using his own emotional attachments against him in ways he had never anticipated. The long-term consequences of the betrayal continued to unfold throughout subsequent seasons, with Tammy later revealed to have survived the massacre and taken control of the remaining Federation forces. Her resurrection of Birdperson as the cyborg Phoenix Person represented the ultimate corruption of Rick's closest friendship, turning his best friend into a weapon designed to be used against him. The wedding massacre also established a template for how Rick's enemies could exploit his few emotional vulnerabilities. By demonstrating that Rick's genuine relationships could be infiltrated and weaponized against him, Tammy's betrayal made Rick even more paranoid about trusting others and more determined to maintain emotional distance from those around him. Before we move on, Make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Squanchy's berserker form, the friend who never backs down. Squanchy represents the ultimate loyal friend who never backs down when the people he cares about are in danger, with his berserker transformation serving as the most powerful display of friendship and sacrifice in the Rick and Morty universe. Squanchy is a cat-like anthropomorphic creature who is a very close friend of Rick and Birdperson, sharing Rick's love for alcohol and partying while maintaining an unshakable loyalty that transcends his seemingly carefree nature. After Tammy reveals herself as a deep cover agent for the Galactic Federation and the wedding reception is ambushed by Gromflamites, Squanchy tells Rick to save his family and get out before pulling out one of his teeth and consuming a green liquid substance that transforms him into a giant version of himself with superhuman strength and endurance. This transformation allows Squanchy to fight off the Federation army while Rick escapes with his family, ultimately saving their lives through his willingness to sacrifice everything for his friends. Squanchy first appeared in Rick and Morty during the Season 1 finale, Ricksy Business, where Rick invited him to the house party that spiraled out of control while Beth and Jerry were away. Morty and Jessica first encountered Squanchy engaging in what he called squanching in Morty's garage, which marked the beginning of many activities that Squanchy would refer to with variations of his species name. This introduction established Squanchy as one of Rick's closest friends and a regular presence in his social circle. Squanchy's friendship with Rick and Birdperson extends back decades to their shared history as freedom fighters against the Galactic Federation. The three aliens formed the core of a rebellion that fought numerous battles to free various planets from Federation control, committing many actions that the Federation classified as terrorism, but that the rebels viewed as necessary resistance against tyrannical authority. Their bond was forged through combat, shared danger, and a mutual commitment to fighting oppression across the galaxy. The trio's relationship went beyond simple friendship to include creative collaboration, as revealed in the episode Get Swifty, when Rick, Birdperson, and Squanchy formed a band called The Flesh Curtains. Squanchy served as the drummer, while Birdperson handled vocals, and Rick played bass guitar. Their musical partnership demonstrated the depth of their connection and their ability to work together in peaceful as well as combat situations. Squanchy's personality combines the laid-back attitude of a party animal with the fierce loyalty of a warrior. He shares Rick's love for alcohol and festivities, often being found at social gatherings, where drinking and celebration are the primary activities. However, beneath this carefree exterior lies a being capable of incredible violence and sacrifice when his friends are threatened. His species name, which doubles as his personal name, reflects a culture where individual identity merges with collective identity. The planet Squanch serves as Squanchy's homeworld and provides the setting for Birdperson and Tammy's wedding. As the host of this celebration, Squanchy demonstrated his generous nature by offering his world as a venue for his friends' happiness. The planet's name, sharing Squanchy's species name, suggests either that he holds significant influence there or that his people have a strong connection to their homeworld that extends beyond simple residency. Squanchy's berserker transformation represents a biological capability unique to his species, involving the consumption of a green liquid substance stored within his teeth. This transformation ability suggests that Squanchy's people evolved as warriors, developing the capacity to dramatically increase their size and strength during times of extreme danger. The fact that this power requires breaking a tooth indicates that it comes at personal cost and is reserved for only the most desperate situations. The wedding celebration on planet Squanch proceeded peacefully for most of the ceremony, with Squanchy serving as a gracious host to the assembled guests. He greeted Rick and his family warmly, using his characteristic enthusiastic language, while ensuring that everyone felt welcome at the celebration. Squanchy's role as host put him in a position of responsibility for the safety and comfort of all attendees, making him particularly invested in the success of the event. As the reception began, Squanchy mingled with guests and participated in the festivities while maintaining his typical party-loving demeanor. He appeared genuinely happy for Birdperson's marriage to Tammy, viewing the union as a positive development in his friend's life. The celebration represented everything Squanchy valued: friendship, loyalty, happiness, and the opportunity to bring people together in joy rather than conflict. However, the peaceful atmosphere began to shift when Tammy delivered her wedding speech that revealed her true identity as a Galactic Federation agent. Squanchy, like all the other guests, was caught completely off guard by this revelation. The transformation of a joyous celebration into a trap for wanted criminals created an immediate crisis that threatened everyone Squanchy cared about, particularly his longtime friends Rick and Birdperson. When Tammy shot Birdperson multiple times with her laser rifle, Squanchy witnessed the apparent death of one of his closest friends at the hands of someone they had all trusted. The betrayal and violence shattered the peaceful celebration and activated Squanchy's protective instincts. Seeing Birdperson fall triggered an emotional response that would drive Squanchy to take extreme action to protect his remaining friends. The emergence of hidden Galactic Federation agents throughout the reception hall created a battlefield scenario that Squanchy recognized from his days as a freedom fighter. The same enemies he had fought alongside Rick and Birdperson decades earlier had returned to threaten his friends and family. This realization that the old war had followed them to what should have been a safe, happy occasion intensified Squanchy's determination to fight back. As Federation agents began arresting and shooting wedding guests, Squanchy assessed the tactical situation and realized that Rick and his family needed time to escape. The overwhelming number of enemy forces and their strategic positioning meant that a conventional fight would likely result in the capture or death of everyone present. Only a dramatic intervention could provide enough distraction and destruction to create an escape opportunity. Squanchy's decision to transform represented a calculated sacrifice rather than an impulsive reaction. He understood that using his berserker form would likely result in his own death, but would give his friends the best chance of survival. This willingness to trade his life for theirs demonstrated the depth of loyalty that defined Squanchy's character and his relationship with Rick's circle. As the Federation agents closed in on Rick and his family, Squanchy made the ultimate gesture of friendship and sacrifice. He told Rick to save his family and get out, taking responsibility for creating the diversion needed for their escape. This moment revealed Squanchy's true character, as someone willing to put his friends' welfare above his own survival, even when facing overwhelming odds against a well-armed enemy force. Squanchy reached into his mouth and pulled out one of his own teeth, breaking it in half to access the green liquid substance stored within. This action demonstrated both the physical pain he was willing to endure and the biological mechanism that his species had evolved for extreme combat situations. The deliberate breaking of his tooth showed that transformation came at a personal cost, making it a true sacrifice rather than a simple power-up. Upon consuming the green liquid, Squanchy began his transformation into berserker form. His body rapidly expanded to enormous size while his strength and endurance increased dramatically. The transformation turned him from a small, cat-like creature into a giant warrior capable of fighting multiple armed opponents simultaneously. His appearance became more muscular and intimidating while retaining his basic feline characteristics. The transformed Squanchy immediately engaged the Federation forces with incredible ferocity and effectiveness. His massive size allowed him to physically overpower agents who had been trained to fight normal-sized opponents, while his enhanced strength enabled him to destroy weapons and equipment that would normally be impervious to unarmed attack. The berserker form granted him the ability to shrug off laser blasts that would be fatal to his normal form. Squanchy's rampage through the Federation forces created the chaos and destruction necessary for Rick's escape plan. He drew the attention of enemy agents away from Rick and his family, while simultaneously eliminating multiple threats through direct combat. His willingness to charge into overwhelming enemy fire demonstrated the fearless nature that his berserker transformation unlocked. The battle showcased Squanchy's tactical intelligence, even in his transformed state. Rather than simply attacking random targets, he focused his efforts on the agents most threatening to Rick's family, while positioning himself to maximize the defensive barrier he provided. His actions reflected years of combat experience from the rebellion, showing that his berserker form enhanced rather than replaced his warrior instincts. Throughout the fight, Squanchy maintained his focus on his primary objective, giving Rick and his family time to escape. He sustained multiple wounds from Federation weapons but continued fighting until he had created sufficient opportunity for their getaway. His endurance in berserker form allowed him to absorb damage that would incapacitate a normal being while maintaining his combat effectiveness. The transformation also affected Squanchy's vocal capabilities, changing his characteristic squanching language into more aggressive vocalizations appropriate for combat. However, his personality remained recognizable beneath the berserker rage, showing that the transformation enhanced his existing traits rather than completely replacing them with mindless violence. The immediate consequences of Squanchy's berserker transformation were devastating for the Galactic Federation forces at the wedding. His rampage eliminated numerous agents and destroyed substantial equipment, disrupting their carefully planned operation to capture Rick and his associates. The unexpected resistance forced the Federation to redirect resources from pursuing fleeing guests to containing the immediate threat that Squanchy represented. Rick and his family successfully escaped during the chaos that Squanchy created, reaching their ship and fleeing planet Squanch before Federation reinforcements could arrive. The sacrifice accomplished its primary objective of saving Rick's family, though it came at enormous personal cost to Squanchy himself. The success of the escape validated Squanchy's tactical assessment and demonstrated the effectiveness of his ultimate sacrifice. However, the aftermath left Squanchy's fate uncertain for years. The intensity of the battle and the overwhelming number of Federation forces suggested that even his berserker form might not have been sufficient to survive the encounter. Rick was forced to flee without knowing whether his friend had survived, creating a source of guilt and uncertainty that would affect him for seasons to come. The Federation's response to Squanchy's intervention revealed their lack of preparation for dealing with berserker-class opponents. Their weapons and tactics had been designed for fighting normal-sized beings, making them less effective against a giant transformed warrior. This tactical failure demonstrated that despite their intelligence advantages, the Federation could still be outfought by determined opponents willing to make extreme sacrifices. The Wedding Massacre became a turning point in the war between Rick's Circle and the Galactic Federation. Squanchy's heroic last stand inspired other resistance fighters, while demonstrating that the Federation's apparent victory came at significant cost. His actions proved that Rick's friends were willing to die rather than surrender, making future operations against them more dangerous and unpredictable. The emotional impact on Rick was profound, as he had lost two of his closest friends in a single day. Birdperson's apparent death and Squanchy's sacrifice eliminated most of Rick's support network, leaving him more isolated than ever. The guilt over their losses would influence Rick's subsequent decisions and his relationships with other people, making him more reluctant to form new close friendships. The long-term consequences of Squanchy's berserker transformation extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation at the wedding. His heroic sacrifice became a defining moment that influenced Rick's character development and his approach to relationships throughout subsequent seasons. The memory of Squanchy's willingness to die for his friends served as both inspiration and a source of guilt for Rick, who struggled with the knowledge that others had paid the price for his enemies' pursuit of him. Squanchy's apparent death reinforced Rick's cynical worldview about the costs of friendship and emotional attachment. Having lost both Birdperson and Squanchy in the same incident, Rick became even more reluctant to form close relationships or trust others with his vulnerabilities. The trauma of watching his friends sacrifice themselves for him contributed to Rick's increasing isolation and his tendency to push people away before they could be hurt. However, Squanchy's fate remained uncertain for several seasons, with hints that he might have survived his confrontation with the Federation forces. In Edge of Morty, Rick Die Rick Pete, one of Rick's possible deaths involved being ripped in half by Squanchy in his berserker form, suggesting that Squanchy's survival was at least possible within the multiverse. This foreshadowing kept alive the hope that Rick's loyal friend might return. The revelation of Squanchy's survival came in Season 7's How Poopy Got His Poop Back, where Rick recruited him for an intervention involving Mr. Poopy Butthole. Rick's comment, "Told you he wasn't dead," suggested that Rick had suspected or hoped for Squanchy's survival, despite the apparent hopelessness of his situation at the wedding. The reunion provided emotional closure for both characters and demonstrated the enduring strength of their friendship. Squanchy's return revealed the long-term consequences of his berserker transformation and the trauma of his experiences during the wedding massacre. His increased reliance on alcohol and drugs suggested that surviving the Federation attack had come at psychological cost, showing that even successful heroic sacrifices can leave lasting damage. His eventual arrest for smuggling venom indicated that his life after the wedding had been difficult and marked by poor decisions. The limitations of Squanchy's berserker form became apparent during his return appearance, when his attempt to transform while intoxicated resulted in failure and illness, rather than the dramatic enhancement seen at the wedding. This demonstrated that the berserker ability required physical and mental preparation to function properly, and that substance abuse could interfere with his species' natural combat capabilities. Squanchy's character arc from loyal friend to heroic sacrifice to troubled survivor reflected the broader themes of Rick and Morty about the costs of violence and the complexity of relationships. His willingness to sacrifice himself highlighted the genuine bonds that existed between Rick's friends, while his subsequent struggles showed that surviving trauma doesn't necessarily lead to happiness or easy resolution of problems. The broader implications of Squanchy's berserker transformation influenced how other characters viewed loyalty and sacrifice throughout the series. His example set a standard for what true friendship could require, while also demonstrating the potential costs of such extreme devotion. Future characters had to measure their own commitment against the example of someone willing to die for his friends. Squanchy's survival and eventual return also provided Rick with an opportunity to confront his own guilt and gratitude regarding his friend's sacrifice. The fact that Squanchy had survived meant that Rick's guilt over his apparent death was misplaced, but it also created new obligations to help his friend deal with the consequences of his heroic actions. The long-term legacy of Squanchy's berserker form established him as one of the most loyal and selfless characters in the Rick and Morty universe. His transformation represented the ultimate expression of friendship, the willingness to sacrifice everything for those you care about. This standard of loyalty influenced how other characters approached their relationships with Rick and provided a model for what genuine friendship could accomplish even in the most desperate circumstances. Squanchy's story ultimately demonstrated that while Rick's lifestyle created constant danger for those around him, it also generated bonds of loyalty and friendship strong enough to overcome seemingly impossible odds. His berserker transformation became a symbol of the positive aspects of Rick's influence on others, showing that even someone as cynical and destructive as Rick could inspire others to acts of genuine heroism and selflessness. The enduring impact of Squanchy's sacrifice resonated throughout the series as a reminder that some friendships are worth any cost and that loyalty can manifest in ways that transcend normal expectations of what friends should do for each other. His example provided hope that despite Rick's many flaws and the dangers of his lifestyle, the connections he formed with others could produce genuine good in the universe. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.